morning. This Committee on Appropriation is reconvening the Fiscal Year 2015 budget hearings. We recessed the previous hearing held on Friday, June 13th with the University of Guam and the Guam Community College. We are now here today to discuss the budget request for the Department of Education. I have with me the Oversight Chair for the Education, Speaker Wampat, and Senator Chris Duenas, who have joined me this morning for this morning's hearing. I got a note from Senator Eileen Yamashita that she unfortunately is speaking at a conference this morning, so I'm unable to attend. She's the Speaker's Vice Chair of the Committee on Education. Let's proceed with your testimony.
Vice Speaker Cruz, Speaker Wampat, Senator Duenas. Good morning. I have assembled with me the deputies of the Department of Education. Just a brief introduction of Nataling Taitano, who was Deputy for Finance and Administrative Services, Joe Sanchez, who was Deputy for Curriculum and Instruction, Erica Cruz, Deputy for Educational Support and Community Learning, and Rob Millay, Deputy for Assessment and Accountability. And we're here to be able to provide as much information to you as you go through the process of evaluating the appropriations request for the coming fiscal year. We have a lot of information, and we're happy to work through it any which way you would like. But I did provide a testimony that I hope you have a copy of today, and I won't read through every single line, but it did help. At least I would like to just go through it in a way to frame where we are as a department, put the budget in context, and talk a little bit about our priorities, and then go into the details as you'd like. So the GDOE currently serves over 31,000 students and their families. We employ over 3,800 employees. This school year, we will have 41 schools, one more than we did last year, including 26 elementary schools, 8 middle schools, 6 high schools, and an alternative school. Our mission is to prepare students to be ready for college and career opportunities when they exit our school system, and it is a mission that is critical to our families and to our island's future. And so we come to the legislature today to seek your assistance in providing the resources necessary to meet this mission. Before I get into the 15 requests, I just think it's important to talk about, to set it in context with regard to challenges that have arisen in our prior appropriations and challenges that are affecting our ability to ensure that GDOE is on stable financial footing and able to maximize the resources available to serve our children. In both FY13 and FY14, the legislature passed and the governor assigned Appropriations Acts, which funded the department with approximately $13 million in revenue, 8.3 in FY13 and $5 million in FY14 that did not materialize. This revenue was supposed to come as a result of property revaluation and would have been deposited in the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund for use by the department. However, the revaluation did not take place during these fiscal years and is not scheduled to be completed until sometime in FY15. The result is a gaping budgetary hole that impacts our ability to stay current with our payments to vendors, to cover utilities, and to ensure that we make payroll every 2 weeks. To mitigate this challenge, we have tried to conserve energy, slow down hiring, and continue working with the Bureau of Budget Management Research and the Department of Administration to release allotments and cash and to avert any interruption of operations. However, this cannot continue without a true solution to this budgetary shortfall. If we are unable to address this shortfall, we face the prospect as early as September of this year of being without the cash needed to pay for critical services, such as custodial, trash collection, and food services. I think both the legislature and governor have acknowledged the department's situation and have sought a solution, but what we need now is immediate assistance in finding that funding solution. Failure to do so may put us at risk of being unable to maintain services at our schools at the beginning of the 2014-15 school year. In addition to our TEF problem, we also came to the legislature earlier this year with a supplemental request in the amount of $5.4 million to help cover the current shortfall in utilities and help bring on additional staff to support the opening of the new Teton High School and expansion of Okadu High School. And so we asked for the legislature to take action on the supplemental request in 14 because it does impact on our 15 operations. I think you'll find, and if you care to discuss that, we are happy to provide the information, that utility increases have really impacted on the department, and we've been trying very much to keep pace with it. But we are still working to meet that gap. And then second, with regard to the expansion of Okudu High School and the opening of a new Teton High School, we have been able to basically shift teachers from the schools where the population is being shifted from the overcrowded schools. But there are additional support staff, administrative staff that can't be shared, and we need to address those needs through the end of this current fiscal year, and then we can talk a little bit about a proposed adjustment to FY15 to cover going forward. Despite our budgetary challenges, we continue to work hard to avoid the interruption of services and to move the school system forward. So I think during the current fiscal year, we've made a number of strides, and we've done so with the support of the governor and with the support of this legislature, in fact, and in partnership. And so I know that our speaker is very aware of these because she's been involved in a number of these, and so have many of you. In terms of facilities, we've successfully obligated the remainder of the $60 million in ARA funding, and that had been outstanding for a number of years, and for which we had gotten a number of extensions. With that funding, we completed the roof repairs and fire alarm installation at all of our schools. We installed over 2,000 air conditioning units at all of our schools. The last and the major ones are actually being installed as we speak in some of our high schools. We outsourced custodial services at all of our schools, completed the expansion of Okudu High School to accommodate now up to 2,000 students, renovated Untalon Middle School in Maragata and hoping to get full occupancy next week, which will open at the beginning of this next school year in August 2014. On track to open the new Teton High School to offset some of the overpopulation issues we saw at GW and JFK. Successfully moved central offices from Hagåtña to the new Teton headquarters. Initiated repairs of the George Washington High School track, which is expected to complete in September 2014, and that was a project that was sponsored by late Senator Pangilinan, and so we're happy to get that completed in time for the next school year. Mitigated Simon Sanchez High School facility concerns. That was a major project of ours in November, as you recall, where we were close to closure, and worked really hard with the school and with the regulatory agencies to make sure we did not interrupt the school year for those students. Worked with DPW and GITA on an RFP stemming from legislation passed by this legislature, sponsored by our speaker, for $100 million to fund facilities improvements, beginning with Simon Sanchez High School, and also to support the development of a master facilities plan to guide the rest of our facilities improvements in the future. We are preparing for solar energy at our leased schools. We are close to reaching an agreement to install solar panels at Okudu, Adakau, Liguan, and Istanbul Middle School. This is a leased school with our GEF partners, and also working with GSA to see what we can do to facilitate solar energy in the rest of our school system. And then with additional funding invested in playground equipment at all of our elementary schools. With regard to teaching and learning, we continued implementation of Common Core with a focus on instructional strategies and building the curricular infrastructure at the school level. We have been in the middle of the design and implementation of a comprehensive assessment framework, which will include a decision on a summative assessment, which currently is SAT 10, that would be aligned with our Common Core standards. We've concentrated in professional development and curriculum resources for teachers, and then continued investment in classroom technology. As you know, we provided laptops for every teacher. Any excess laptops we sent to the classroom. We provided more mobile laptop carts with a goal of making laptops accessible for all 5th, 6th, 9th, and 11th graders. We have provided document cameras, digital projectors for our classrooms, have begun the expansion of wireless capabilities in all 40 schools at our libraries, and hopefully with additional funding we can do more. And then we'd like to do more to invest in our training for teachers in the use of this technology to facilitate learning. We're revisiting our alternative school model and providing northern satellites to serve our children better, especially the ones who are most at risk of failing in the mainstream and dropping out of school. We are moving towards WASC accreditation of all schools and possible district accreditation this fall. We have implemented new teacher and administrator evaluation tools and tried to do as much as we could to provide additional funding for instructional supplies, school-wide equipment needs. I know that in this current fiscal year, Speaker, with the Salapi Principat, been able to provide a stream of funding to assist at the school level. And then funds for interscholastic equipment, band equipment, cafeteria equipment. And then other major steps forward that we'd like to just mention, the clean and unmodified audit opinion received from our auditors, a positive revisit by our U.S. Department of Education. We established the Foundation for Public Education, something that had been longstanding, again, with the leadership of our speaker and the legislature. We were happy to launch that earlier this year. And then we are near final discussion, deliberation, and approval of our new 5-year district action plan, which will incorporate all of the activities that we've been focused on to date and lay out where we want to be in the next 5 years. So, of course, this is not only local funded. This is really the activities that have been funded by ARA funding, by our consolidated grant. We obviously get SPED funding, special education funding, Head Start funding, and also assistance from the Department of Interior. And so with all of these components, we've been able to move our public school system forward. And the effort now is to figure out how to sustain and maintain those investments. So if you're following on page 5, I just wanted to start with the DOE FY15 budget. Our request is $298.8 million, representing the amount we believe would help to advance our core mission and to successfully prepare students for college and career opportunities. This request is a significant increase, a 34% increase, $76 million over the FY14 appropriation. And it is a budget that began with public hearings held at each of our schools, one-on-one meetings between the superintendent and the divisions and our school leaders, and then numerous work sessions with the Guam Education Board before receiving the board's final approval in January when we transmitted it to the legislature. Before you, you'll find a breakdown of our FY15 request by key priority area. And I won't go through each of these details, but try to highlight what the key issues are for the department as I see it. Number one, all of this, and then we'll add up to the total amount. So we're trying to incorporate everything that we're asking for. Number one is really to ensure funding to effectively staff and operate 41 schools, and that's a $250 million request. I think, as you will see broken down into components and in greater detail in your materials, we're trying to ensure the efficient and effective staffing at our 41 public schools. So as you know, we employ about 1,800 certified teachers, and we continue to work towards ensuring that there are no teacher vacancies in our classrooms. And so as part of that process, we've worked to maximize our classrooms and ensure that we are utilizing our teacher resources as efficiently as possible. In addition, we continue to be short-staffed on the support staff side. We try very hard to address the schools in critical need, so that means school aides, administrative support, and those are positions that are important to the school that we've tried very hard to be very judicious in funding, given some of the challenges that we have with regard to our budget. But essentially, we need to keep our schools safe. And in the administrative offices, because of our reliance on our new financial management system, on PowerSchool, on more automation, more technology, we're trying very hard to shore up the administrative support office with people who have the skills, or able to get those skills to be able to meet the expectations of this department. We try to we proposed sufficient funding to implement the Competitive Wage Act as it was implemented last year outside of our budget, so we've incorporated that increase into our current budget. Again, utility rate increases, we try to anticipate and incorporate those expectations in our budget. Again, we hope that as we move forward with solar energy and renewable sources, that we'll be able to find some savings, but that's still early on, and we're just in the progress of trying to get our first schools up and running. I wanted to point out that we are, while we focus on our schools, we are proposing new positions and support to build capacity at the central office. And this comes in light of our high-risk concerns. So as you know, the U.S. Department of Education just recently completed their visit, and it's a message that they echoed as well. And it makes sense that we have a third-party fiduciary that we have to pay for with local funds at this point. It was covered by our ARA funds for the first 2 years, and then now it's fallen on our local budget, and that means that those dollars don't go to our students and don't go to our classrooms. But if we're going to get past this high-risk status and this fiduciary requirement, we're going to have to find a way to build the capacity in our own staff, within our own divisions, and basically almost replicate the functions that they're doing at the same level, so that we can make the argument that they are no longer needed in order to effectively manage our federal funds. So we've had this discussion with our Department of Education officials who visited, and with the third party, that their job is not just to be fiduciary agents to oversee and manage the funds and approve and disapprove, but they've got to help us with what we're paying for, to plan out and build the capacity to move forward. That means identifying positions that are needed. That means identifying skill sets that need to be focused on, and that means building transition plans that'll move us from what they are currently responsible for to district ownership and management of those functions. So that's something that we will try to build. And I think the plan is, as we go forward, to take down the amount of what we're paying them to fund our local capacity efforts, and therefore try to manage that transition in terms of how we're paying for them currently. Our next major area, providing greater support for school and classroom resources. We know this is a constant challenge, and we haven't had those resources available in the past. But what we see every year is a call for help from the schools. And so I'd like to just highlight, that first bullet, replacing the dilapidated student desks, chairs, and cafeteria tables throughout the school district. As we went through Simon Sanchez High School during that period in November when we were close to closure, we worked very closely with the regulatory agencies. And every chipped desk, every table that has got a dent in it that needs to be repaired, all these things that we saw over in Simon Sanchez are things that we also see to some degree in our other schools. And so we try very hard to figure out how to maintain and make sure that this equipment is safe for students. We know that when our regulatory agencies come in, they will help us identify where those issues are. But we haven't had the resources in the past to make a constant replenishment and updating of equipment that has been outdated and needs to be removed. So that was a constant request from our schools across the board this school year. What comes up before the legislature each year is the textbook inventory and what we're doing to ensure an adequate updating of our textbooks for instructional purposes. So we continue to seek the funds to do that. I've gone through every school, most of the schools by now this summer, and those concerns about books being stored and unused, I think we are have largely mitigated or are continuing to mitigate, meaning we sent out clear directives and have gone in to inspect these storage rooms to make sure that if the books are available, that they are being used for instruction, that they are pushed out into the classrooms, and anything that is not being used needs to be surveyed appropriately. And we're trying to work with the Judah Foundation to make sure that those books are available and not being wasted. But that's a constant effort, and I know that many of you have raised those concerns in the past. But what was really nice about the last Appropriations Act was that we were given the flexibility as well, that in addition to textbooks that we do focus on, to purchase music equipment. And so we have a lot of those aspiring artists in our school system, and music teachers and art teachers who want to see these programs rebuilt. And we think there's a way to do it that is in line with our focus on Common Core state standards and student excellence. But part of the challenge is that we rely on teachers who bring in their own equipment and try to put together borrowed equipment to serve our students. So we are very happy with the support that was given last year, that flexibility. And so I believe we've got about $250,000 of music equipment that will be coming into our schools with last year's support. I think additionally, and staff will be able to work with you, we'd love some flexibility to use this fund to not just with textbooks, but supplementary instructional materials. As we go into Common Core and as we work with teachers, we know that we're not simply a textbook-centered classroom anymore. We are using technology. We want to incorporate other supplementary materials, and it'd be nice to have that flexibility to use these funds to address that change in the classroom going forward. So obviously the funding level is important, but really the flexibility as well to be able to be creative and flexible in that regard. The next few sections are bullets in this section are really about instructional supplies. I was very pleased to be able to in my first year with the support of DOI funds to provide teachers additional support, and we provided $500 per teacher to purchase instructional supplies for the classroom. And these supplies were managed at the school level. The principals signed off on them, but every teacher was given an allocation to be able to make requests for classroom instructional supplies. and I'd like to find an opportunity to do that. It cost $1 million in that first year at $500 a teacher. That was similar to what we did with DOI money that was continued by the legislature last year, which was to reinvest in the Salapi Principat and guarantee some funding at $1 million as well for principals to work with their teachers to fund those school-wide needs, which include technology, playground equipment, and other school priorities. We continue to invest in our technology infrastructure. So with our federal funds, we've been able to purchase more equipment, and so that's been the smart boards, the laptops, all the gadgets that we have in the classroom that are being used and are proven useful. We have been working to expand our wireless capabilities, and so there's always more to do on the technology side, and so we'd like to find a way to continue that for our students because the 21st century is here, and it involves technology, and we need our students prepared to be fluent and to help them meet those expectations of this century. Okay, and the others you can go through, and we can talk about them as you desire. I think number 3, the upgrade schools to provide healthy and safe environments. That's a big chunk, and I think there's going to be some interaction between this section and the $100 million of facilities funding that was identified and that is under the RFP right now. So, we just couldn't ignore the fact that the Army Corps of Engineers came in and gave us a report and put on paper the $90 million of deferred maintenance affecting our schools. And when with that type of dollar amount and with that type of need documented and well known in our schools and by those who work and go to school in our buildings, we wanted to, if there were no other sources at the time we proposed this budget, to at least put a first installment on a 5-year plan to invest in our facilities. And so we proposed $18 million in funding, which is 1/5 of the $90 million total that had been identified by the Army Corps. Now, that of course would include, we would hope to also include $1 million for the master facilities plan. So some of these will be partially addressed through the $100 million renovation. I think one thing to note about that RFP and the way the legislation would work and how the funding sources would work is we believe that the RFP would make sense for lease-back arrangements. And that means that it really lends itself to whole school renovations and not the repairs of the canopies or the repair of the smaller projects that are really critical to some of our schools but don't really necessitate leasing that school out. So we think that the $100 million will go, if used effectively, to address needs like Simon Sanchez High School, our secondary schools, which have high traffic and high wear and tear, the possibility of building a new central and northern middle school. Those are projects where a lease-back arrangement makes sense because of the significance of the investment. But we do want to talk about some level of local support to be able to address for instance, the canopy issues that we see that have been deteriorating over the years, and during the rainy season will result in water being our kids getting wet as they go from class to class. Those are significant projects that we'd like to get done, and so some level of more flexible local funding might be appropriate for addressing those projects. And among those projects, we just list some of those that you're well aware of. Our school gymnasiums. A lot of our community partners, we just recognize the lack of gyms and the gymnasiums and facilities here on island in general. And so we do have many partners who come to our schools to try to use the facilities, and it doesn't matter if they're in poor condition. It's better than having no facilities. So we've been working to try to make sure that we work with our community partners to do so. But we would like the opportunity to do projects like Southern High School's gym, Unsalon and Ocean View Middle School gyms, where we've been able to do renovations and put those gyms back into use for our students and our communities. We, again, Okadu High School had its track and field renovated as part of the Okadu project. George Washington High School's track and field will be renovated by the end of by this year, before early in the next school year. And JFK track, for instance, and the other track and fields, Southern High School's baseball field. There are a lot of needs across our school system that still need to be addressed, so we suggested those priorities as well. And then overall with facilities and maintenance, we have a big conversation about where we're headed with facilities and maintenance that still needs to be had. Now, in the event that we continue to do more lease-back arrangements, those those issues are taken care of for the term of those arrangements. So if we have a 25-year term on a school, the maintenance gets handled by the landlord, and therefore we don't need to attend to those issues. And the experience at the schools have been very positive. Those requests get done on time. For those schools that do not have that type of arrangement, we've basically been spreading our department thin and trying to address those various needs as well. And so with the $100 million out there, not knowing exactly how many schools will end up being under that lease-back arrangement, we still need to think about what facility and maintenance support needs to be done for the other schools and how to deliver that. At this point, I'm operating a division that is in dire need of what are the critical needs of our school, plumbers, electricians, and welders. And so those are the high work request needs at those schools that don't have a landlord, and those are positions that we still need to backstop in terms of making sure we have an adequate supply of workers who can do that type of work. And then, I guess the other update is continue to work with GSA to try to get the security systems procured and in place in our school system. And I think there's a need for an ongoing appropriation to support that once those security systems are installed. There are obviously a lot of bullet points that we can discuss in detail at your desire. I think at this time, just want to highlight we're proposing an adjustment to the budget request as submitted in January. So back in January, before we had all of the Tizen and Okadu plans laid out for their staffing needs, so we've come further since then. So with the past due merit bonuses and increments that are already paid through the governor's release of available funds in May, we would propose using the amount that we set aside in our budget request to be used to cover the Tizen and Okadu additional staffing needs. And in addition, we are proposing adjusting the CIP request for our facilities to help cover the anticipated utility increases associated with the new facilities. So my staff will be happy to work with you at a later time to go over those details and make any adjustments. Thank you for this opportunity to present the budget request for our department. On behalf of our students, families, employees, we look forward to working with you to resolve our current issues with our TEF shortfall, to identify support for supplemental funding to get to the start of the school year, and then to approve a final appropriation that will meet the needs and mission of the department over the coming fiscal year. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and present testimony, and we're available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. At the very beginning of this, I neglected to do what late Senator Ben used to always open these budget hearings with, and that was just to provide the framework. As many of you know, the fiscal year 2015 budget request proposed a lump sum amount in the amount of $288,918.84 from the general fund and $50,000 from the special funds to the following agencies: the Guam Department of Education, the Certification Board, UOG, GCC, the Legislature, the Office of Finance and Budget, Unified Judiciary, the Public Defender Service Corporation, the Mayor's Council, the Office of Public Accountability, the Office of the Attorney General, and the Guam Visitors Bureau. The Office of Finance and Budget has prorated and estimated that of the lump sum amount in the 2015 executive budget, the governor took the took the lion's share for his operation or the executive operations and left the rest for us, and we're trying to prorate it between us. The prorated share for GDOE would be about $220,437,748, which is an increase of about $8,873,981 in appropriations as identified in the FY2015 budget, separate and apart from the lump sum allocations from the GDOE for FY15. The FY15 appropriation level of $229,311,709. The variance between the FY15 executive budget request and the current FY14 appropriation level is 4.4 increase, or about $9,656,298. And the 2015 budget, the FY15 budget, the 2015 appropriation level is 4.41 increase, or about $9,656,298. And the 2016 budget, the FY16 appropriation level is 4.41 increase, or about $9,656,298. And the 2017 budget, the FY16 appropriation level is 4.41 increase, or about $9,656,298. I realize that amount is considerably about $70 million less than what your request is, and we recognize that. But we also have some questions about the appropriation levels that I'll get into. But just as an initial question, if memory serves me right, in the governor's budget request or somewhere, there was a $5 million being set aside for early education. I followed you through your 10 pages. Did I miss a discussion on the use of this $5 million in early education?
You did not miss that. We did not present that as part of the DOE budget because my understanding is that it's a separate item that comes apart from our appropriation. So we have been in discussions with, obviously we've met with the governor's office. We've met with our committee member, Speaker Wampat, and her Vice Chair, Senator Yamashita, to talk about the department's position on the early childhood investment. We are supportive of investing in early childhood education in our school system. And the issue is how we go about moving forward with that type of initiative. So the way the legislation lays out, it's that beginning, I believe FY16, we need to be in a position to, and Mr. Sanchez can correct me because he's actually handling a lot of that planning and discussion. But it would result in the increase of at least one classroom in each of our district regions to support pre-K classes for 4-year-olds. And then every year beyond that, we would expand for at least four classrooms beyond that until we get to the 5th year, which is a compulsory education requirement, which means that every eligible 4-year-old who wants to come to a public school pre-K classroom would be able to get that education in our school system. So, there's a lot of planning that has to go and has to be involved, and we've been thinking about what year one ought to look like. So part of that means that we've tried to cost out the number one, definitely want to use this year as a planning year, and I've discussed the possibility of adding a position to focus completely on early childhood. Right now we have staff that have been involved in some of the early learning discussions, and we have someone who is the administrator for our Head Start program. But we don't have anybody who's really thought through what that Head Start to 3rd grade continuum ought to be, how it ought to be organized and coordinated. And this pre-K program would be an essential link to that type of discussion and that planning. So it's important for us to really get kids off to the right start. So in concept, we were supportive. From a logistical standpoint, in order to move forward, we have to prepare for the actual classrooms to serve those students. So I think at one classroom a year and 4 classrooms a year, we can manage that, and it's just simply a matter of finding those available classrooms in schools that are not overflowing. That's not as easy as it sounds, but as we start adding classrooms, then it becomes more difficult and more difficult. In order to make those classrooms ready, we'd have to make sure they're usable and refurbished for our 4-year-olds. That means looking at the Head Start model, those smaller bathrooms, those smaller toilets and sinks, the kitchen facilities. In the event that we have facilities on campus that are available, it might require significant refurbishment. And so with all those costs, and in addition to that, we're going to need some lead time to prepare those classrooms. So I think right now where we are is trying to decide whether we can, in this first year, have someone to help plan for the implementation of this law if it is passed. Number 2, think about the scope of how we could implement it, whether 4 is the right amount, 4 classrooms, whether we can do more, and then think about timing. If we want to make those classrooms available, it would make sense to start now in this current fiscal year, even though the program, the services would not, the education wouldn't be provided until the coming school year. So that's where we are with the discussion. And I think what makes sense in the legislation and what's been discussed is that we do think we can handle this phase-in approach over the coming years. It's the compulsory part at the end, which is going to be something we need to continue to work on. So I think just being realistic, we would love an opportunity to pilot the program to see where we send their 4-year olds to our public schools. We would want to make sure we have sufficient teachers who are qualified and certified to teach our 4-year olds, and be able to make sure there are enough facilities available and we have the resources to make those facilities available, not just in terms of a room, but in terms of collateral equipment, instructional supplies, and so forth. So, we'd love to keep discussing that and hopefully have an investment being made into that first year. But that's separate and apart, which is why we didn't really discuss it here.
You may seem to think that it's separate and apart, but I know the speaker and I have discussed pre-K education since I first came to the legislature, and I'm glad that she and Senator Eileen and Senator Tony have taken it up as their cause, and now the governor has. So I, like you, am supportive. I think when Bob was principal up at Mechanano, I mean, he and I walked around and pointed out where we wanted to put the new classrooms. I mean, that's how far back I'd been talking about this and wanting to put this in. And that's why it was the first question that I was going to ask today, because it's part and parcel of the GDOE budget, and I didn't see anything in the budget with it, and I know that the governor has set aside $5 million for it, and I didn't want him to think that I was ignoring that he had set aside $5 million for it, and I know the speaker has been having discussions, so I think it's imperative that you and your curriculum person and all of you get something to this committee in writing and say, this is what we plan. This is how we plan for it, and we thank you for the $5 million, but we believe that for fiscal year 15, this is all we need for this person, and for 16, we believe that we will need this for starting the classroom renovations, whatever. But I need something in writing, because I don't want the chair of education nor the governor to say that just because you've taken over the committee doesn't mean that you can ignore what we've both stated that we wanted to have in this. And so I'd like something in writing so that it's not said that I dropped the ball on this one, which is the reason why, because Mr. Millay knows that that was the first thing that came out of my mouth when I went up for the ceremony at this school. I think it was 6 years ago. And so I want something in writing so that the committee can say to the governor, when he says, why didn't you include my $5 million? I'll say, your education people said, I only need this much for 2015. And,
Okay, absolutely. I mean, Vice Speaker, when you and I had our first conversation, probably when I started, I think we started with early childhood education and investing in our youngest kids, so we avoid the pipeline to our jails and to our, just to the negative, on these negative tracks, by investing when they're earlier. So appreciate that, and we definitely will have that.
No, I mean, I know that the two of you have suffered me going through these discussions, but
right.
I just want to make sure that everybody understands that I'm not ignoring the speaker and her vice chair's efforts, and the governor's setting aside $5 million. And if that's not necessary for this fiscal year, we need to know how much that's going to be.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I have many other questions, but in deference to the fact that she's the chairman of education and also the speaker, I will allow the speaker to ask the first set of questions. And I also want to acknowledge the arrival and presence of Senator Michael Sinicholas, who has joined us. And so, Madam Speaker, you may pose whatever questions you wish. I have about 20 or 30 questions at the end, but I'll let her do it first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to, for the beginning at least, is to work with your statement, because it's a summary of your budget. And I thank you, of course, for your presentation and highlighting, of course, not just what the department needs, but some of your accomplishments. On page 2, of course, the very first thing that I like to ask is that
5 million is just for TEF,
for TEFF.
for TEFF.
But for the reserves, I mean, not knowing, of course, where the monies will be coming from, it's a general fund lump sum that you'll be receiving. There's a percentage that every department and agency, of course, has been, those monies have been withheld, and then it would take the department to put in a request, and then depending, of guess, on the availability of cash, they're being released. So what is the amount for just DOE that's been withheld?
While she's locating that, I mean, just to recall, the reserve percentage for this current fiscal year was lowered to 10% versus the 15% from the prior year.
It's closer to 11% because of the 5 million in the TEFF. So it's 11%.
And what's that amount?
To 23.3 million.
23.3 million?
Yes.
And have you put in a request
Yes.
to the governor to release?
Yes.
And what has,
We have we recently submitted 3 different requests for releases, and those have yet to be responded to.
and if you are able to get the 23 million, or even the 13 million, let's say, would the department be able to finish this fiscal year and entering the new school year?
Right. So part of the concern is the 8.3 is related to FY13 expenditures expenditures that were made, but we don't have the cash. We did not receive the related cash payments. So the 23.3 million in reserves are for FY14, is for the FY14 budget cycle.
And if you get then the 23 million, you should be able to finish this fiscal year and go into the new school year.
If we
Because you're
get the-
indicating that you're going to need additional monies, of course, for the opening of the school year, which is before the beginning of the fiscal year, because school years and fiscal years don't coincide. And with the new faculty and staff for the Tejan High School, and then the expansion of Okudu, that means you're going to need monies then for August and the opening of the school year. Will the 23.3 be sufficient to take you at least to open the school year and to finish off the rest of your obligations just for fiscal year 2014? Not talking about, what happened to last year's.
I think what Ms. Title and I have been discussing is that we've been trying to, over the current first fiscal year, cover our payments with, as the vendor invoices come in. We've been trying to cover, so we've been able to successfully get towards the end of this fiscal year, but it's not as easy to do so now. And so releasing the reserves will maybe give us some relief on catching up to where we are in terms of our obligations to vendors. And did not, at the time, and we would have to go back and reconfirm this, did not incorporate the need to fund what is currently in the supplemental funds. So we're playing this catch-up game where we're trying to make up for the TEF shortfall, and we keep trying to pay our bills. But at some point, it's going to come home to roost. And so I think the release of the reserves and the availability of a funding solution for the TEF will ensure that we are caught up and don't have this issue of vendors really trying to work with us to catch up on our payments. That did not incorporate, but we can actually go back and do that math of the new funds that we would need to support the opening of the new schools.
On page 9, you've indicated that you have outsourced now all of the custodial services in all schools. So what will happen to the remaining custodians that you currently have on staff? Where are they going?
When we discussed the potential outsourcing, what had been happening was that we were not hiring custodians and definitely through attrition, it was pushing us towards a more outsourced model. So this year we were looking again at expanding the outsourced custodial services because of the lack of staff, and then we were going to consolidate those remaining custodians in some of our locally run schools. Instead, we said we would do something different, and we outsourced all the schools, and then we spread the custodians out so that every school had a maintenance custodian or a custodian on site at all times. So what happens based on the schedule of custodial services, they come in at certain parts of the day to do their work, but they're not there the entire day. So in those gaps, it's been helpful to have someone on site to handle all those remaining issues. It's a discussion that we have to have because what had happened before in those outsourced schools is that they would see those gaps where the custodians were not on, custodial services were not on site, and there would be a need for something, some kind of response to a school incident in the bathroom somewhere. So it's actually worked very well to have someone on site to handle those gap hours, someone to supervise the quality or to basically assure the quality of the custodial services that are being provided, whether they're in the late hours or in the early mornings. And that's how we've proceeded. We haven't hired more custodians, but right now that's how we're operating. So we haven't made a decision whether to hire more custodians and to always keep that model in place. But right now we're getting the results, and I think it's helped us be assured that at all hours our schools are covered from that standpoint.
The idea, of course, of reclassifying all of the custodians in schools is to make them maintenance custodians,
Right.
exactly for the reasons that you've mentioned. But then at the same time, there's been this real concern that the schools are not being maintained, and whether these custodians could have been a part of maintenance as general helpers,
Right.
and then eventually, hopefully, train and acquire the skills so that you can build then the workforce in the maintenance division. Has that been considered?
It is considered. I mean, so what's really nice now about this model is that if you go to a school, you know that they have custodial services, and the issue there is managing their contract, managing their scope of work, and the principals should not be signing off on those invoices unless they're satisfied with the work. So that's one of the efforts. With their on-site locally funded custodian, whether they have one or two, depending on the population or more, what we've done is, as we've gone, and I've gone with my facilities and maintenance chief out to the schools, they have a person on site who has some of the skills to do the maintenance work, to do some of the self-help work, and it becomes really our obligation just to provide the supplies. So we don't need to send facility and maintenance division employees to all the schools to change a light bulb or to replace a ceiling tile or some of those things that can be done on site, because now every school has somebody who's able to do that, so long as we can provide them with the materials and supplies to do that job.
So do you have 41 maintenance custodians? So you can have one for every school?
No, we have 41 custodians. Not all of them are classified as maintenance custodians, and so that varies. What we try to do is align those, because they're different. I'm not sure what the exact titles are, but the maintenance custodians, we did stick with the maintenance custodians. We did stick at the schools that have the most needs, just to align those skill sets.
Right, so one of the things that we're doing was putting at least one person at the elementary schools, and at the secondary schools with the larger populations, there's between 2 and 3.
So you've indicated then that the $350,000 that was appropriated for the track at GW, were you able to use the entire amount? Yes?
So yes, we were able to use that amount, and I think the issue is, right now we're at 50% completion, and the track materials coming in to be able to lay the new surface on the track, and I believe we're looking at what resources might be needed to fund lighting. So we do all the lighting as well. And that's not within the 350, right?
I believe some of the lighting will be taken care of.
Okay, so we'll be able to take care of some of the lighting and expenses as well.
And your request, of course, for power, because you've indicated that, and we've spoken to the
what's happened in this process is that in this procurement process, there are obviously a number of questions that have come back to be answered, partly by GSA to the extent that they can advise on the process, and then to GDOE as the user to help really clarify the specs on what's needed. The challenge has been our lack of expertise in these areas to answer what are really technical questions about the types of solar panels, what will it take to maintain and support those panels. So we did reach out to GPA for their assistance to see if they could provide some technical expertise. We've been working with the governor's office to see if we can get the other agencies who might have this expertise to help give us some answers to these questions. Obviously, the industry could provide the answers, but I think it would take them bowing out of the competition in order to help us. So that's where we are right now. We're kind of at a standstill because I've looked at the questions, we've all looked at it and said we don't really have any engineers anymore on staff, and it's going to take some partnership with someone else outside the agency.
So has GPA been helpful at all?
We have not received a response to that request. I think obviously we've heard and they've expressed very publicly their concerns about what would happen if you went solar with all of our schools. I'm trying to set up a meeting with them just to talk a little bit more about possible solutions. It hasn't been our intent or necessarily our intent to just go full force and take everyone off the grid, which is why I think it's to our benefit to have the 4 Lee schools up and running as a pilot so we can see what the actual impact is. But obviously we want to do more, and we need them as a partner any which way, because we are not going off the grid completely, and so we're going to need their support to implement and hopefully to plan so we don't put ratepayers at risk and put the government at risk or put the agency at risk. So we haven't heard back to our initial response, and but as of this week we've been trying to schedule our next meeting to see if we can sit down and talk big picture about where things are headed.
Your highest school consumption of power is JFK. JFK is not listed as one of the Lee schools. Have you spoken to the owners?
They have indicated, so I think they heard that we were going forward. So what happened is in our discussions, as the solar discussion was happening at the legislature, GEF did approach us and said, do we think we could participate? And when the legislation was approved exempting the Lee schools from the procurement process, they stepped up and began to outline and put forth proposals for us to consider. So we're at the stage of kind of figuring out what agreement would work to and protect the interests of the department and facilitate the solar energy installation. JFK, is it CAPFA has reached out to us indicating their interest, and we will happy to get into that discussion. I think their early inclination was to see whether we could combine JFK and Chief Brody as part of the project, and that's something that's not going to happen. We would like to separate the Lee school from the locally owned school, since there are 2 pieces of the legislation addresses them separately. But I think what we're doing, once we get to resolution with GAF, hopefully this month or early next month, on an agreement, then we can use that as a template for furthering the discussions on JFK.
You have a request here for the Lee schools, and one of them would be for insurance. And we had this conversation the last time in which the legislature withheld, of course, certain amounts of money to be transferred over to these companies then who are leasing the schools, in the hopes of allowing the department to go in and negotiate that dollar amount for maintenance. In particular, it was JFK, because the amount was just exorbitant. I'd like to know whether now we're 2 years into this, whether there have you entered into any type of negotiation with them and are able to reduce that dollar amount? The maintenance cost was extremely high.
I will say that, let me put it this way. Our relationship with our landlords are very important on these Lee schools, and if we do more, it's really going to be important to select partners that are going to work very cooperatively in terms of obviously providing them the right level of services to the school, but recognizing the fiscal challenges and constraints. So, with GEF, we've been working with them on improving our custodial services and doing things like making sure the schools are repainted on a 5-year cycle and JFK, our negotiations have gone a little different. I think what we've been able to do is hold tight on the existing level of insurance and maintenance costs. Last time we entered into negotiation, the costs were even higher, and it was it wasn't very transparent to us as to where those costs were coming from. And because right now we're more than an arm's length away from these services, so we interact with the landlord. The landlord interacts with the vendor and sets up the scope of work and gives us the cost and passes on the cost. And so we did get a sense of here's the scope of work, but we needed more information, more detailed breakdown to be able to make decisions on our own as to how we would negotiate down from that scope of work. So we needed to be able to line item, here's the service that they're asking, here's the cost, so we could say, well, why don't we cut that, and so we can prioritize the other services. We never got that level of information, and and because there's a deadline to making sure these agreements are in place for the coming school year, we decided to at least hold them to the current level, and that's where we are today.
Well, just a note is that just for that one school, the maintenance cost was equal or greater than the four other Lee schools, and that's the reason why we wanted a breakdown. And to this date, we have not received that as well.
Happy to work with you to get that information.
Yeah, and maybe there's something we need to do this time through legislation is to mandate that breakdown then be given just as the way we ask the different departments and agencies to give a reporting on how you've expended monies, appropriated monies to you.
I mean, there is a benefit when we're working with the landlord. They can go and procure their own services. They'll determine how to bid it out, how to get the lowest cost, etc. But once they choose a vendor, we're kind of at their mercy because we don't enter into that process. We don't participate in selection. We basically try to ensure that the services are being done, and then the cost has been very difficult for us to negotiate. So at least we have a marker, and we've held tight and said, look, here's your current budget. You're going to have to work within that budget. But we haven't been able to get to the level of detail that you're requesting.
And of course, page 6, and to reduce your dependence on a third-party fiduciary agent. Will this be the last year now? Is this the 5th year for the fiduciary agent?
We have one more year coming up. I believe it's in October, maybe. It'll start the last year. The challenge is that the requirement for a third-party fiduciary agent is mandated by the U.S. Department of Education. We want to work through this last year very aggressively to determine how far we can get in addressing our high-risk situation. But until that restriction or that condition is removed, we would likely have to go out to bid for services again, unless we can get the department to scale back that requirement or at least reduce the scope. So that's the work cut out for us, and we do have some good guidelines to work from the last visit, and we'll try to attack that even more to put us in as best position as possible when we have to go out.
In this fiscal year budget, you had received an additional appropriation of about $32,000 to $35,000 for Chamorro studies. I've noticed, however, that the position is still vacant. What happened then to that money? That was a specific appropriation just to Chamorro studies.
The money for Chamorro studies is set aside for them, so
But you have to recruit it. You haven't filled that position.
I will go and I'll revisit that and report back to you on that item.
Because then
That is
you're-
set aside. We didn't use that money, but it's just a matter of picking up the
Right,
person.
but then
Okay.
now you're requesting again for the same position, so that means
Yeah.
you should have
Okay.
that $30-some thousand, and then in addition, again, you're asking for another 35. That would be only to maintain then that position rather, but you had it ready for almost a year without using that money. So can we find out what has happened then to that?
I'll get back to you on that specifically.
This has been always a bone of contention for me as a former school principal in ordering desks. And, we all know is that you don't want to order press wood desks because as they chip easily, when their air fans are off, then they start to expand. schools now for
Right,
Antalan and
right. So we're not using Presswood desks for those schools. So collateral equipment that's coming in will be high, the lifetime warranty apparently. So that's great. No, I understand with the situation with our current Presswood desks. If they're left out and somehow get wet, then there's a problem. But the desk that we saw, for instance, that we're moving over to Antalan Middle School, that was through the collateral equipment arrangement when they were over at Teason. Those desks are in just excellent condition after 2 years. So we're really, I think that is the direction to go. It is more expensive, but of course the lifetime
right, but then
lasts,
that
right? So that would make
lasts
more
longer,
sense.
right. I know you've mitigated books in your storage rooms, and I've worked very closely with Miss Carlotta Leon Guerrero, who has been acquiring all of these textbooks that's been surveyed, but many of them are brand new in boxes that have not even been opened. How are you reducing the number of textbooks that come in? And these are at the request of teachers. They're supposed to pilot them for a year. They order them granted for the entire department. Some would like it and some would not. But yet, I've heard many parents say that the children don't have the textbooks, and yet they're brand new textbooks in storage rooms. And also being sent, of course, yes, to the islands. And you're asking for, it would be a total of like $3.8 million of textbooks. And in order to also help reduce the amount almost every year, we've actually extended the adoption of certain textbooks every year now to extend the period of time then to allow for the department to be able to catch up and allow the legislature also to be able to fund monies for the textbooks.
So if I could, let me say a few words and then have Joe go into a little bit more detail. I agree with you, and in fact, when we were over at Simon Sanchez, we ran into a whole lot of AP biology books, AP biology, and I said, and it was, quite a number, and we knew that it was way in excess of any number of students taking AP biology. And in fact, we put it out to the rest of the schools, and somebody came back and said, we need 30, and we see, another school said, we need 30. We said, 30 boxes? And they said, no, 30 books, which really didn't help us with the load that we had. So, I'm not even sure where those came from and how those were processed, and which is why we went through and said we need to ensure accurate inventory of the textbooks. And at that point, we actually gave a little bit of a mercy period to update those inventories, and then directives to clear out those books that are not being used. We're not going to be able to use and don't want to go to waste. And I just sat down with the Zuda Foundation to think about how we can make that system of distributing those books more efficient. But let me ask Joe to comment more on how we control for what is being ordered and what is being used.
So, as the superintendent noted, that situation at Simon Sanchez was a real eye-opener. And we immediately called all the principals together. And I think the biggest problem we have is ensuring that the principals and teachers know that they need to maximize the resources that they have. So it is true, we get some answers from teachers saying, oh, well, we don't really want to use the textbook this time. Or the AP biology book, I even asked a group of teachers this question. I said, well, we have a shortage of regular biology books. Why can't we use the AP biology books in the biology classes? And their response was, surprisingly, oh, we can because those are for AP biology. Biology is biology, but what it shows is the mentality of some of our staff that a textbook is supposed to be the entire curriculum, and if it's not meant for AP biology, then we can't use it for another class. So what we've worked with the schools on, or working with principals and teachers, is how to maximize the use of the resources that we have. So one of those things is getting those resources out of all of the closets and the storage rooms that they had. So we had pretty much a large percentage of our central office staff actually go out into the schools and go to every storage room and say, hey, take these books out, give us an inventory of what's in there. Even books that are no longer technically in the inventory but are still usable, we ask them to identify what those books are and come up with uses for those texts. An example would be if we had outdated literature books. Well, the classics don't change. The classics are the same over the past, just because it's an outdated literature book, that doesn't mean you can't use them anymore. So we asked, can you give those to the English department? Take a look at what we have with regards to our standards and see how those resources can be used. So it's not just a matter of giving them out, but we wanted to make sure that we train the teachers and we change the mentality of how these resources can be used. And that's an example. I know that in the testimony there's a request about allowing us to have that flexibility for instructional materials. And part of that has to do with working with teachers to really upgrade not just the quality but the content of the material that they use for their curriculum. So, I'll give you an example. In an English class, part of the Common Core standards is you have to read at least 50% informational text. It doesn't have to be all literature. You have to start reading documents. You have to start reading informational text and whatnot. So we want to make sure that teachers are also including reading material from science classes, reading material from social studies classes, reading materials from other coursework so that students are able to learn how to use and read material that's outside of just literature. So I guess in a nutshell, it's working with the teachers and working with the schools to maximize the resources that we do have out there, because there are quite a bit.
If I may, you also know that we have, with the implementation of Common Core, we've provided more of an opportunity to determine how best to use those resources that were set aside for the elementary school reform programs. And so we do see as some schools shift away from doing the reading part of direct instructions, for instance, or the math, however they want to modify. If those books become available, we try to distribute them to other schools that can make use of it. And then when we're not successful, so we're seeing that kind of transition where we were heavily supplied and resourced by those reform programs, Success for All, and direct instruction in particular. And now the schools are saying that we may not have a need for these materials, and you'll see some of that ending up in the Azuda shipments.
I just have a few more. You've indicated, of course, 800,000 for school libraries, and normally that amount of money would come from the passport office by law. So we don't know what that is, but I'm sure then that the OFB should be able to pull that out to see whether the government has actually collected, that amount that you're requesting for. The last one is going through, of course, the budget and then the breakdown. And for C&I, you need to explain all these requests that you have here. Why the need for a total of about 57 new positions of teacher assistants, and then for teacher twos, and I don't know what you mean by aspire coordinators, you're looking, gosh, a whole slew of them. I didn't even have a chance to, 108 total of positions just for C&I. And if you can please explain what these are, because I understand that for other positions in the schools, the elementary division, middle and high school, you have your vacant positions. Those have retired, then you bring those back in. You maintain the salary straight across. But these are new positions. I'd like to know what these new positions are for.
Let me just start with what we're trying to accomplish there, and then Joe can add to that since they're in his division. What we are trying to demonstrate and have to move in this direction with regard to our federal funds is to provide a local maintenance of effort, because of course, as you recognize, our federal funds are to supplement what we are doing in our school system. And so as we've gone along, even in just the past 2 years, past 2 cycles, in working with USDOE, there is a change going on in the federal agency with regard to accountability for funds being used. And as part of that, there has been more effort to identify the supplementary nature of our federal funds. And so what you're seeing as new positions there are actually positions that have been previously funded with federal funds that we would try to continue funding for. But there has to be some kind of local investment to demonstrate that these are we may eventually be shifting down the road to maintain some of these initiatives in our school system. So that's part of the accountability measure. We have committed that we will be in our budget to make requests for that local maintenance of effort and going forward, because that's been an explicit question by our federal counterparts. And Joe can talk a little bit more about those positions as well.
Yeah, the superintendent's exactly right. The guidance that we've gotten from USED is that we have to, whenever we submit our consolidated grant application, we have to be very clear about what our core function programs are and what our supplemental programs are. So an example would be like the Aspire program is the former D program, and so it's a different name change, and now it has to take on a more academic approach. So we have the Aspire program, we have the Escuela Puengi, which is the night school program, and we have summer school. Now those programs, at face value, when we report to USED, they seem like core programs, meaning you provide them to everybody. It's expected on an annual basis. We want to provide it in every single school, so that's considered a core function. So what USED has told us is that we have to include that in our local budget, so that it's essentially a supplemental program rather than federal funds taking a complete having it 100% federally funded. Now I do want to point out that simply putting it in the budget, that allows us the flexibility to say, hey, we've requested for it in the local budget, and now it justifies us continuing to put it into our consolidated grant for funding, because we've made the effort to include it in our local budget.
I would just say that we are I would say again, this to me is a transition happening at USED that is trickling down into how we are approaching our supporter program. So at this point, we would recognize that yes, we funded a lot of these programs significantly with our consolidated grant. We want to demonstrate more of an effort to provide that local maintenance, and to the extent that USED becomes even more rigid in the future, we may have to really think hard about how we are going to move forward if in fact they get much stricter. They haven't been as strict, and they've been more flexible. So they haven't said you've got to do a 15% maintenance effort as you might find in other programs. So we basically identified a 12% investment that we would make that request, and see how that goes as you go through the budget and as we talk with the USED. But thinking about the possibility that they may come back and say, okay, for the next grant cycle, we definitely can only fund you at 85% of that program, and unless you have that local effort, we're not going to be able to make it happen. So I don't think we're there yet, but this is kind of that shift that I think is happening, that they've asked us to demonstrate our, that we're doing something on the local side.
I'm going to say this because it happens every year, and even today was discussed. The government, the department and agencies get really excited when we hear that there are these federal funds that are going to be available. First year they give you 100% of funding, and then thereafter it starts to reduce, and then we expect the government now to fully fund it. And I know that every year when you hire individuals for these federally funded programs, there's always that stipulation that depending on availability of funds, that those positions, may not be available if the funds aren't there. So why do we continue to, as I can understand, yes, why we want to, but then at the same time, you're committing the government to millions of dollars that now, just to take example, what it is that the vice speakers mentioned, what the governor has set aside just for DOE, and when you factor in all of these requests now, because we have chosen now to participate in those federal programs, that we're going to have to do the maintenance of effort. And that's,
Right.
To the tune of millions of dollars. So,
Right.
and so just by putting it in, I understand that, you're right, gives you now the opportunity to request and write for a grant to get these consolidated grants. But then when you don't get the money, then what would the situation be?
Right. So that's what I'm saying is we're in a situation that is still in flux. So I would say previously there's been a lot more flexibility, especially when it comes to the U.S. territories, because there has been a recognition at the Department of Education that we have significant financial constraints, that the needs are significant, and in some cases more extreme than they see in other districts. And so we've worked in pretty much very much collaboratively with them to ensure that they're giving us as much support as possible, recognizing those limitations. But what I'm getting a sense from on their end, because we see it when we go there and they give us technical assistance, there's now a little bit more stress on that, from their assistant secretary up to the secretary on being accountable for the funds. And so in our discussions, it's changed, just even like I said in these past 2 grant cycles. Okay, we're no longer, we've got to report much more specifically on outcomes. We've got to demonstrate the supplementary nature of the federal investment and so forth. The consolidated grant is formula driven, and in fact, we rely on it significantly on an annual basis to fund a lot of what we're trying to do to advance our curriculum and instruction side of things. And so we will continue to rely on that. In the past, they haven't been as rigid, so if there hasn't been a local maintenance, they've been flexible. But we're just saying that for this year, we've made the request, and we will work with USED. If we don't get the resources, don't get all the resources, we will work with them to see what needs to be done. I just want to indicate, so right now we're not committed to, that we won't lose. I don't know that we would lose an entire program because the resources change on the local side. But I'm getting a sense that we have to continue to report these efforts out and to apprise them of our progress, because they're getting the heat on that side with regard to saying, what are we doing for Guam? What are we funding? Why are we funding it this way? That's given us a level of anxiety on our end and really changed the nature of how we apply for the funds. So this is the first year when we've had to designate what is your core activity, what is the supplementary activity that you're applying for based on their expectations. So I don't think we're committing the local government because, again, it's all subject to the availability of federal funds and these programs. Now, again, if we do fund it on the local side, that's the decision that has to be really thought through. But with regard to the federal funds, if when we hire federally funded employees, it is subject to the availability and continuation of those federal programs.
And I was, told by some federal officials that the problem that they see with DOE requesting for grant monies is that we use a lot of it on personnel and very little on the programs, buying the materials and supplies that's really needed for the program, because we spend it all on personnel. And therefore, the match from the government, of course, is higher. That means we need to be able then to hire again additional personnel. So that's just some information I think is
Sure.
important to know. I'll ask one more question because I know others may want to. We gave the department $11.1 million for the school lunch program reimbursement program. And today, of course, in the paper and on the news is that now we're going to have 21 schools participating in a free breakfast and lunch program. What then, with that information and starting, of course, in this fiscal year, how did you determine which schools are participating? And I'm hoping is on the basis of information that you have already, where the majority of the schools are on, school children are on the free and reduced lunch programs. And the last question related to this is, well, what is the amount, or is it you're requesting for the school lunch program, which you eventually get reimbursement for? Would that then be a lot less of the $11.1 million, or?
So you're asking a very complicated question, and it's complicated in a good way because we are working with the same issues in the school system right now. So we are about to enter again into our last year of our food services contract, and our current contractor is Sodexo, and so we'll be working through that last year and working with the legislature probably, because we need to revisit whether the authority exists and in what form to continue to outsource food services. And again, working with the board to determine how we would like to do so, given the feedback, given the costs, and so forth. I mean, right now, like we said with custodial services, we had not been hiring cafeteria workers when we've been consolidating the locally run schools. And so we have about 6 schools that are continue to be GDOE cafeterias, and the rest are Sodexo. That gives us an opportunity to determine, to look at both models and how they're being run, the quality of the food, the participation, and that's where we're at with trying to figure out. We also are looking at have a cost study that's being completed by UOG, and I'm getting briefed, I believe that's today, on close to final results that will give us a sense of how costs are being incurred by the local DOE and also to use that to seek a higher reimbursement, right? So there's another issue of, are we being reimbursed adequately, given that we are in the same situation as Hawaii and Alaska, which have much higher reimbursement rates than we do. Having said that, the implementation of what was last year called Provision 2 and this year called Community Eligibility is, it puts us in a real situation, because our mission is to educate our kids. We believe that having them well fed and ready for learning is important. And so we've been very supportive of the direction that USDA has gone to try to find ways to make it easy for kids, particularly in high poverty areas, to have access to food at the school sites. And that's really what's been happening over the past couple of years. And so that's really how the basis for how selecting these schools is really making sure they met the eligibility criteria, and then be able to really reduce the bureaucratic paperwork in order to give access to food services. The challenge is that as we do that, there is still a local subsidy component that's involved, and for this coming year, what you have is a breakdown of what that local. So there will be an increase in the local subsidy required in order to provide the service to our kids. And we have a lot of elementary schools that are on that list, and we know that our elementary schools have the highest participation. We're going to be looking to see what happens at the secondary level, where kids are not eating, not participating as highly as we would like them to. And I'm hoping that as we go through this year, we will be able to also determine how to best deliver the food services, whether locally or through an outsourced vendor. So the local subsidy right now is because we are providing a local subsidy because we're not able to fill that gap between the reimbursement rate, which we hope to be higher, and the cost that Sodexo is incurring on the outsourced side. So that gap is the local subsidy that's been funded in the past few years and is growing as we try to expand our food services programs.
But if you're, so the 21 schools that are going to be participating here, are we required to upfront the monies and then be reimbursed for these 21 schools? The same way we're doing it with now the other 21 schools or 20 schools?
What happens is we receive a drawdown from USDA, and we use that money to pay the vendor, and we use some local money to pay it. So we pay the vendor after we do the drawdown. But there is, as the superintendent said, a gap between the amount that we get in reimbursement and what we have to pay the vendor.
I don't know that it's called upfronting the money. I think we have the federal funds available, but that reimbursement doesn't happen until everything's been verified in terms of meals served. So there's a verification after the fact that needs to occur, and then there's a local component of funding that also has to come through once the verification is completed.
So, but if we upfront the money, then we get reimbursed, then where do the monies go when we get it back?
Yeah, we don't know.
I just said that we get the drawdown to pay for the vendor. So we don't spend the money up front.
Okay, so
Yeah.
We get the drawdown, and then we pay the vendor
After the
and
fact.
for the invoice.
that's for the local monies that we would appropriate,
For
or
outsourcing.
the federal USDA monies.
For the school lunch program.
And would that same procedure be for
Yes.
these
Yes.
21 schools?
Yes.
Did they give the department a certain amount for you to determine why 21 and maybe not all of our schools? How did you come up with 21?
So part of the eligibility criteria is that they call it identified individuals, meaning they're on the direct certification that comes from public health. The total population at a school has to be at a threshold of 40% or higher, which basically is all of our schools. So, except for three. There are three that do not meet that criteria. However, the higher that percentage is, the greater the reimbursement rate. And so the 21 schools were the ones that were going to give us the higher reimbursement rate for the community eligibility provision. So that's how they were identified. They have the higher eligibility rate, well above the 40% requirement.
Thank you very much.
Oh, this will be a perfect segue. And I'm having problems with just these general discussions. How much exactly is this local subsidy you're talking about, and what is the increase going to be as a result of adding these 21 schools?
We're asking for an additional 1.8 based on the additional 12 schools participating in this program.
And that's a local subsidy, right? The increase in the local subsidy. What are we paying currently in local subsidy?
We pay our vendor about $1 million a month for the school lunch. What the gap is, I'll need to verify that.
I'm recalling it about 5 million. We can just pull up the number though. That
Okay.
we currently pay, and then this
We
would be in
confirm
addition
that,
to-
would
yes.
you? And when I started, I apologize for Senator Yamashida's absence, but she did give me some questions, so I want to pose her questions, and if I can get them addressed. And her first one was really, one of them was about the school meal program, and she was wondering, where is the study that provides the analysis of cost effectiveness of the food program?
Right,
You
so
mentioned the university was going to be briefing you today.
that's right, today, and we got to turn it around both for the board and for you as well. Yeah, we're trying to get that closed out. It was extended beyond what we initially anticipated.
Okay, can you provide us with that so that she can see it, because she's asked about that? And the other question that she had is relates to school program. Are the kids eating the food? Is it her question? Because she's gone, and is the food that they're feeding the children culturally competent? Is her question, and how much of the food is turning out to be wet garbage?
Do you have that? So, I mean, let me just, I'll speak anecdotally about it. First of all, just generally, as we said before, you get more participation at the elementary schools, and as the kids get older, for many different reasons, you see less participation in our secondary schools, and that's been the challenge to figure out how to increase that participation. But kids who come to school, the elementary school, if they're going to get lunch, they're going to eat their lunch, or they're going to get their trays and go. We have been, again, as many of you have been out to the schools for lunches, there is a clear difference between what's being served at our locally run cafeterias, and we just approved a new menu for the coming year, and I was very pleased to see it, because on our locally run menus, they are incorporating some of the menus that have been developed by students, our culinary students, and so it's good to see that, because there's all that control over the menu, and it meets the nutritional requirements and so forth. And with an outsourced vendor, it's been, they've been surveying the parents and students for their reactions. But of course, if you just look at the menu, it's a different type of menu. You've got hamburgers on a certain schedule, you've got pizza on a certain schedule, and we'd like to improve that. So I think the challenge is, as we go forward, we're trying to figure out what we're doing this year with the outsourced vendors, but really figuring out what we're doing beyond that. It's really figuring out how to have more control over the menu, and making sure that we're not looking at just lower costs to serve basics to our students, but finding things that are really going to increase. I don't have the specifics. I've just been talking anecdotally to people interested in this issue, and also part of the buy local contingents who are really in their interactions are identifying a lot of food being wasted for different reasons. I don't have those stats available right now, but it's something that we're going to have to address.
And I think Senator Yamashita is very interested, because her next question was just that.
Right.
On the buy local, and are the children more willing to eat the Manila bananas over the Chiquita bananas? And are we following procurement rules as it relates to that?
Okay.
And you mentioned that you have a new menu for this upcoming school year.
For
I
the
think
local,
if you provide that to the committee, and I can provide it to Senator Yamashita, so she can look to see whether or not she feels that, or at least she believes them to be culturally competent.
So if I could, I mean, just wanted to say that I'm very supportive of doing what we can to buy locally, and it's easier to do with right now because we only have 6 schools to do that to do more with our 6 locally GDOE run cafeterias because of the amounts needed and the greater control and understanding of the local menus. And so I know that we're procuring lettuce, cucumbers, and cherry tomatoes, at the very least, from our local providers.
But that's only for the 6 schools.
That
How
is
about the
right. That's
35
right.
others?
With regard to the 35, the issue has constantly been, at least as we brought people together and also met with the senator, this issue of being able to render an adequate supply and reliable supply of the produce needed to supply the menu to that number of students under the 35 schools, and whether or not there is a way to adequately plan and ensure that the farmer is able to produce to meet the requirements. Because we're not even though we do support buying local, the other mission is to ensure that the kids have the food that they need on that day for their school lunch and breakfast menus. So my understanding was UOG was getting involved to try to work with the farmers to, based on our information about what that menu is and over the coming cycles, how to use that information to plan accordingly and to coordinate the efforts of the farmers. And I'm not sure if this new farmers co-op will be helpful in doing that as well, but I think the issue really has been maintaining a reliable supply for the volume that's being discussed. So I think, but we do think that we have a good model with regard to our 6 schools, and depending on how we look at the outsourcing, insourcing, for the coming year, may be able to do more on that front. The issue of the procurement, I know we've gone through this, and there is a law that really, and the way I interpret it is making the good faith effort, the Department of Agriculture being at the center of this, to procure locally first before before you go outsource. And the challenge is, there hasn't been that coordinating mechanism to guarantee the produce availability at the same time that we're asked to meet the requirements of our school lunch program.
And the $5 million that the governor set aside, in that $5 million, there was some money for performance standards. I think it was $500,000. And Senator Yamashita wanted, what is the status of the performance standards and the professional growth plans for teachers and school leaders?
That referring to our teacher evaluation system?
Yeah, she calls it performance standards. And let me just read it, and then maybe you can. Performance standards. What is the status of performance standards and professional growth plans for teachers and school leaders?
Maybe ask Deputy Superintendent Cruz to address where we are with progression, the teacher development and piloting our new evaluation system.
Last school year, we were able to pilot 6 schools. This upcoming school year, we will have all schools implement the new professional teacher evaluation program. We've had administrators go through the training in April and May, and then actually today they're going through further training. But prior to the end of the school year, the administrators were tasked to train their teachers in the anticipation of the implementation of the new program.
The new evaluation, I think, just to kind of link these what I think the senator's trying to do is, first of all, we do have a new evaluation system that's been put in place, and this one was really jointly developed by members of the Guam Federation of Teachers as well as management, and supported by National Governors Association funding to get this off the ground. And it incorporates as part of it, which is a new part of it, I believe, the student performance, academic performance, as well as student perceptions. And so piloting this past year will enable us to fully roll it out. Now, the question that I think she's raising is whether, and I may just be trying to interpret this, but there is $500,000 set aside, I believe, for teacher incentives, similar to what I would say merit. I don't know if it's a merit. The way merit bonuses are set up to reward excellent performance, and however that's been implemented in the past. I think the idea here is that they're recognizing that high-performing teachers ought to be acknowledged, recognized, and rewarded as we try to encourage excellence. That she may be linking that to how we're doing in developing this new evaluation standard. So So we've been in discussion. I know the governor's office raised it with me about how we would use these incentives, and we're not yet set on whether or not we would connect them or how we would connect them to the new evaluations since we're just piloting it. So it is one option that as we pilot the teacher evaluations, as those evaluations come in, as you identify those who are having the greatest impact on our students based on that evaluation framework to link the incentives, that would be separate and apart from what we do with merit bonuses that I understand are currently suspended under the Competitive Wage Act.
There was, just as her last question on the performance standards, will we be doing employee performance standards for other categories such as the school nurses, bus drivers, etc.?
Yeah, well, yes, for counselors and nurses, we've moved forward with approving a new framework for counselors as well as nurses in terms of an evaluation of their performance that has been different from what we've been doing in the past. So that's something we're just getting started on this school year. But that's happening. As regard to other staff, I don't think we're there yet. We do, for instance, with the bus drivers, we are working with them with regard to what I would call professional development. We've been working to help train them on our expectations regarding behavior and our discipline methods, so that we have a unified, consistent way of handling student behavior, both at the schools and on the buses. And that's been productive and helpful for both bringing DPW drivers and our school administrators together on how to address student behavior. But that hasn't yet transformed into any type of evaluation standard at all. So.
And the other question that she wanted to ask was about this third-party arrangement. And would it be possible maybe for you to provide us with something in writing? I have to admit that I'm not on the education committee, so I may not have gotten to the briefing when the USDOE were here, and I'm not even sure if they came over. I was surprised because I thought they've usually come, and I thought maybe I just didn't get invited, but I guess
Right.
they didn't come. So something in writing about what they said, what dates we can start looking at, because I know everybody has been apoplectic about the fact that we spend almost $2 million on the receiver for GBB over 5 years, but we're spending $4 million a year just on this third party.
Right.
So something in writing that says, as of this year, this is what USDOE said to us. This is what they want us to do by the end of this year, by the end of this school year, this upcoming school year. This is what we need to be able to do in the next 12 to 18 months, so that in 18 months we can stop this $4 million bleeding.
Right. So I'm happy to do that. We're actually trying to finalize a written communication that I'd like to share with all of our employees, those who participated in the visits and those who were not, but just are obviously part of our school system. When US Ed came here, they did schedule their visits slightly differently than in the past. In the past they visited with the governor's office and with the legislature, I believe, and made the rounds. This time they wanted to focus really in our schools, and so they did a lot more site visits than we were used to, and did a lot less of the central office presentations. They were really trying to get a good feel for the progress updates. So let me just, because I do want you to know, and for public consumption, is that we on a bi-weekly basis, we have conference calls with US Ed and with our third party as well to monitor the progress of what is called the Comprehensive Corrective Action Plan. It's a plan that was approved by the US Department and set in place to monitor how we are addressing areas of high risk and areas of deficiency. My observation of that plan is that it's a good framework for activities that ought to be done, but it wasn't a very strategic, it's not a strategic plan for moving off of high risk. And so over the past year, what I've tried to focus in on are those key pieces that we need to get done to move ourselves forward and put ourselves in a position to really make the case to get off of high risk. And those areas right now are really, with the implementation of the new financial management system, updating or completing our new standard operating procedure to demonstrate how we are conducting business today, not under the old system, under the new system, and really make sure it's reflective of the practices and processes processes that are in place, after all the training that we've invested and all of the improvements that we've invested in, that we have those so that anybody who comes into these offices and divisions understand what's going on. To establish what has been lingering since 2009, initially started but not carried through, to reestablish our management internal controls processes, to develop those internal controls at the management level that are really attuned to identifying weaknesses in the processes and in the areas of responsibility. And the third is to build our internal audit office. We have had an internal audit office that I would say has been focused primarily on non-appropriated funds because that had been an issue over the past years. What we really need is to build that office, which is why we've asked for additional positions in the audit function to be able to align their activities with the high-risk areas in our corrective action plan, to be able to monitor implementation of the management internal controls, and to conduct audits and set out corrective action plans in those key areas where we're seeing failures. These are functions that any good organization ought to have in place, and that we need to have in place. Right now, I would say that the third-party fiduciary, the public auditor, and the USAID have taken on, assumed those responsibilities and are the ones keeping us internally in check. We need to be able to do that for ourselves. So those are the three main areas that we're tackling right now. And then we'd like to delve into probably the accounting section and the procurement section to see if we can improve those processes as well. What's happened in the past is I think the third-party fiduciary has been really fiduciary, right? They've been in charge of the funds, the management of the funds, the approvals, the sign-offs. I don't think we have, and we've tried to do this over the past year, we haven't leveraged the consultative component. That you're not just here to sit and watch over our funds, but we really need that assistance. And I think USAID's intention was for them to lend us that assistance in designing and building the capacity needed to take those functions back. And so, as we develop the scope of work for this next contract year, that's what I'm going to be asking from them. We had the USAID visit. We've identified areas that need to have aggressive focus. I want the third party, if we're going to pay for their services, to be focused on those very same things and to be focused on capacity and transition. The reality is I won't be able to present you anything from USAID which will give you a timeline, give you an expectation of when they're saying we can get off, because they're basically saying, we're not giving you that type of roadmap. What they have pointed out, and what I agree with, is that in the special conditions there is a provision that allows for the Guam Department of Education to request reconsideration of the high-risk status, which includes this condition around the third-party fiduciary, at any time that we see fit. That means, though, that when we do that, they will send down the the troops from USAID to validate whether that progress has been made. And I think it would not be advisable for us to get that reconsideration if we're not ready for it. And so what I'd like to be able to do within this 12 to 18 months is get that reconsideration, get that full visit. But they'll send the legal counsel, their inspector general, the programs, the risk management folks, all to Guam to visit and to make sure that progress is made. And my fear is that if we don't demonstrate sufficient progress to get those changes to the status, then we lose that opportunity for another 2 or 3 years, and we get stuck with the third-party arrangement, and that which we, essentially, like the speaker was talking about, we pay that local fund to access $60 million in federal funds. So it's that, if we don't pay it, we say we don't want to, go with a third party, we lose access to special education funds, to consolidated grant funds, things that we do rely on. So I think the visit was helpful because we hadn't seen them for 2 years. They've recognized progress on a lot of fronts. They've told us areas of improvement that they'd like to see addressed and areas of concern. And I'm happy to articulate that and be transparent about that. But really the important part for me is over the next 12 months, designing a very aggressive strategy to tackle those issues. Because I'd like to be in a position to write a letter to the Department of Education saying, we would like you to come back to reconsider our status, bring all the troops. We think we've made the improvements according to our plan, and we're ready. And that's really the responsibility of our department.
And that's what I was leading to with the question, is that you've now been at the helm for over a year. And I would like to see a strategic plan that you've written up that you believe that you're going to be able to make this request if you can meet certain of these criteria. And just one that you know is my pet peeve is, have your people been trained in procurement yet? You know, you listed procurement as one of the areas that you need to address. And unless I'm missing out on it, yeah, you've changed your procurement head, but is the person that replaced your head of procurement trained in procurement? Will your procurement staff meet the new statutory requirement that I passed this last year? Or will you lose your entire staff when it goes into effect in 2016 because nobody is ready and trained?
So all of our current procurement staff have gone to the modules at GCC that have been available. And so we continue to do that. We're happy to continue to participate and get that training because it's much needed. I will say that in this visit with USED, what I think is a benefit, and I'm happy to share that with the procurement side, not just the this education and appropriation side, but the procurement side, is that I'm really hoping that we can get that focus and work with a third party and work with USED to focus in on procurement. One of the concerns was some of the threshold, for instance, for which you would have to develop contracts for what they would consider smaller purchases under $100,000. They understand that in the regulations there is a requirement to underneath that threshold still abide by current requirements. They're concerned about it because their intent was to facilitate the procurements in a more expeditious way with adequate control, and so I think there's that discussion where they were hoping to provide more guidance on the federal requirements when federal funds are involved, because we know that that's been held up in our procurement processes. So if they suggest changes to the process, I'm happy to share that, because I think we want to be on the same page with understanding our local requirements, but knowing that USED's coming down to make sure that we don't hang up the money and leave it unspent. And then additionally, just to recognize that with our units, we have a federal procurement and local procurement side. And in this visit and in our own observations, we understand that the federal training on how to handle federal funds is maybe different from what we're doing on the local side. And I've tried to bring the unit closer together to make sure that we have one set of standards and understanding what we're able to do to set a high standard of expectation. And if there are any issues that need to be dealt with in terms of the difference between federal and local processes, let's identify them and figure out if there's a resolution to them. But it's as you know, it's a real long-standing problem, and I think it's one of the critical pieces. USED came back and said, we've got to deal with this because it's slowing down our ability to draw down federal funds.
Okay, you made mention of the supplemental request, but if my math is right, you mentioned that you have about $23 million that is currently being held in reserve by the administration. You say that you have a $13 million shortfall in TEFF, which is exacerbating your shortfall. If the governor was to release your full 23 in reserve, that even taking into account the 13 that's missing in TEF, that would be 10 million more than, would you still need a supplement if you got all 23?
So there's 23 million in reserve. We still have a couple more months in the fiscal year. We still need to ensure that we are able to pay, expend payroll.
No, I understand
and
that.
all of our encumbrances and all the, other expenditures for FY15, FY14.
And how much is that? How much is your supplemental request?
5 million.
5 million. And if you got all 23,
If we got all 23, we probably could work to resolve that 5 million in additional needs.
I think so. There are various pieces to this, right? So we're dealing with the fact that cash did not materialize due to the TEF shortfall, and so we're trying to catch up. The reserves are in place, and those were above and beyond what we expected in terms of the 13 shortfall. They encompass the 14 issues, but they also reflect the total appropriation and allotments. And so, yes, if we receive the reserves followed by cash, that would help, because typically it's the reserves, the allotments, and then making sure cash materializes. That's the important part. I think if we had that, we'd be able to negotiate the need for an additional, $5 million. But right now, with all three, the FY13 issues, FY14 shortfall, our hope that we're going to receive enough cash to get through the rest of the school year. We've lumped that all together because I think part of it is just not sure where the solution is going to come from. So
When
if
you
there's
closed-
go ahead.
When you closed off 13, how much did you finally spend for the entire fiscal year? Somehow I remember a number 198 or something.
The 8 million that we're talking about was real expenditures. I have that number somewhere. $210 million
For the was
for 13.
was fully expended. You received and you expended.
What we're saying is we were shorted 8 in cash.
Okay.
We did not receive
We expended 210 and we're short of the cash.
to cover.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand the 8.3 and the 5 for this year, and that's a 13. And I'm saying if we took the 13 from the 23, you would still have 10. Do you still need a supplemental? And it would seem to me if your supplemental is 5, DI math, it's 10 is greater than 5.
Right. The question is whether, so if the $13 million helps us catch up to where we are, the question then is that additional $10 million address the remaining cash expenditures needed without the supplement. So based on our current operations, right? I mean, I'm just trying to make sure we're clear. Yes, I mean, if we address our 13 shortfall, we catch up. Between now and the end of the fiscal year, without considering the supplemental request, will we have enough for operations, continued utilities, expenses, et cetera? And then will we still need that whole $5 million? So we can do the math and try to get
Okay,
back to you
please.
on that.
The other thing is you spent 10 pages in this testimony, and then in 3 lines you go, at this time we are proposing an adjustment to the budget request as submitted in January. I apologize that I just took over this committee, and so I may not have been in the discussions on what the adjustments are. And I'm looking, where are the adjustments and what are the adjustments?
So basically included in our FY15 budget request, because it was done in January and we weren't sure yet how we were going to address past due merit bonuses and increments that needed to be addressed. We included that, and you can get them out, Tony, in our budget request. Those funds were made available to us in May, the governor released funds to be able to address those obligations. Therefore, we do no longer need that in our budget request. At the same time, we are hoping we can simply just shift those over to continue the need for addressing the support at our new schools. So FY14, we request a supplemental. We're saying shift some of the FY15 requests to carry on what was being funded with the supplemental to the rest of the fiscal year. So we no longer need merit bonuses and increments for that purpose since we've addressed those. And so we can, I think that what I said was the staff can provide where those numbers would shift in order to make sure you're clear on.
Okay, yeah,
what
I mean,
that-
that's
so
what
it's
I was
yeah.
looking to try to figure out what those
Right.
adjustments were.
So it would be in a subtraction from
I
the
didn't
merit
see 'em.
bonus. Yeah, so we would subtract the amount, and we can confirm the amount from merit bonus and increments that we requested, and add that amount back to how we would fund Tizen and Okudu staffing requirements.
And do you have the numbers of what you would need to fully staff Tizen? I see it too. Okay, that's fine. I may need the committee gave me about 30 other questions that I'm not asking right now. So we may need to send you a written list of the questions that we'd like to ask, because I'd like my other two colleagues to have an opportunity to ask their questions.
Sir, recognizing that, we would be happy to respond in writing, and also just to sit down staff to staff to meet on any of these issues.
Okay. But on some of the things that I wanted something in writing, so I
Yes.
can hold you to it. I want that in writing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you're right, there's been a lot of detail this morning, so a number of my questions were asked. I only have three general questions, really. In following the budget digest, essentially, we're looking at, and you've just made the presentation telling, I guess, of the 210 million in terms of the audited books closed on 2013. So I just want to clear this issue up one more time. So you're basically saying that you deficit spent from the 8 million, that's how you incurred your shortfall. So you covered that with the current fiscal year budget? Okay. So now I'm understanding that whole 13 and where we're going. So Superintendent, basically what you're saying is, even if you get that 23, what you're looking at is you've played catch up, and so you might make it to the end of the fiscal year with the balance of
Right,
the
it's
10.
right. That's correct. And I hate to say deficit spend, because the issue is we had an appropriation and we worked within the appropriated amounts.
Sure.
It's just when the cash doesn't materialize, and we're not really in charge of those collections, so we're relying on other agencies and
Right.
other to keep us current. That's where it comes up, where we've expended funds.
Sure.
Now we've got to find cash to pay those vendors.
And that wasn't in terms of
Yeah.
indictment, that was just technical
Technical
speak
terms,
of,
yeah.
and where, because I was leading up to where you ended
Yeah,
up right now. So
understood.
essentially what we're talking about is the reserves, in theory, may be able to take you to the end of the year, because you were playing catch up and you used current year funding for prior obligations, essentially, that were carried forward. You paid that off, and then, so that's why you're in that boat again on where we are right now.
It's a significant enough amount that makes it difficult to make any other adjustments to your spending
Right.
to try to catch up. And so what's difficult about that is we've just delayed, and that's just people look, my employees and families look at me and saying, you're delayed the hiring of certain positions that have been in need, but we've done that because we've tried to figure out, are we going to have enough cash to pay our current obligations? But the gap's too big to do it that way. We've tried to conserve on utilities, and you see an adjustment, even as rates increase, the reduction in our power costs, but still not enough to close that gap. So that's what we're trying to do now.
I noticed in your presentation, under one of your bullets, and I guess we're all honing in on this third-party fiduciary, but I enjoyed your presentation in terms of how you presented that the idea is don't ask for something that essentially will end up being something you're not prepared for, and it thus may set you back as opposed to getting where you really want to be. So this 532,000 that was identified under all those categories, would that be kind of the Vice Speaker, the Chairman, has asked for your breakdown, I guess. Would that amount of money that you identified here set up that structure that you're talking about in terms of that transition, if you will, and the ability to say, okay, bring the troops, we're ready for the white glove?
That'll allow us to address some of the personnel needs that have been identified, and affirmed by USAID. Third party has come in and said, if you're going to run these operations, you're going to need to shore up accounting. Your audit office is understaffed, and so forth. Now, it's always a challenge when you're dealing with shortages in the schools and trying to look at whether or not central office personnel are needed. But in this case, because we're already paying out money to a third party, we know that we need to pay those funds, and we can use it more effectively, I believe, if those local funds are just rededicated into our local staff and help train them and make sure they're able to take over those functions. Otherwise, we'll continue to pay out.
And because this makes sense to me, just simply because you're putting an investment forward and saying, if we ever shore this up and get this done, essentially we've shown that, because we could perpetually be on this third party if we don't get to where your goal is and the vision you've set out. So.
Yeah, the challenge is, for instance, in the Virgin Islands, I think they're on their eighth year. I mean, I think both.
Yeah.
I think US Ed has come in and said you guys are much better shape, but of course they're not. They are worried about both. I think the Virgin Islands has been a long standing issue for them, and then I think Puerto Rico was also under high risk, and the challenge there was that they took them off of high risk, and then realized they did it prematurely, and they encountered all the other issues again once they did that, and so they're less likely. They're going to be more risk averse and less likely to say get off of the high risk until they're sure, or until we really push the envelope on it. And so I'd like to be in a position to be more aggressive about pushing the envelope with US Ed. The challenge is it can't just be the superintendent wants to get off a high risk. What we know and the reason why US Ed came and spent time in the schools is that this new financial management system is a system.
Mm-hmm.
It flows from the central office and into the schools. We need our school employees to be comfortable and adept at manipulating that system to make sure, and our central office folks need to be responsive and accountable, and it's a real sense of organizational change that has to occur. So it can't be that the superintendent says, okay, I know how to operate it, deputies know how to operate it, we're good. We've got to go down to the administrative assistant in charge of entering, this input. They will go and say, how are you familiar with it? How are these, how is it working? Is it being done correctly? And so forth. That's the type of due diligence that they are going to do. So we need to make sure that every employee involved in this process is ready.
Mr. Superintendent, I noticed under your 31.9 million request under item 3. I really like to try to manage from the perspective of the committee and the legislature's perspective when we get in sometimes, unfortunately, the war of words in going back and forth on budgeting. And I appreciate the breakdown in the presentation, especially in the first line of the bullet that you give here, that this is a result of the $90 million overview that was given in terms of the conditions of the facilities and the like. Now, in that, we are now, and you've recognized in your opening presentation, this legislature has provided an opportunity for that GITA proposal that's been put out for the $100 million. So I just want to manage perceptions and expectations here, saying you've got a plan basically now going forward for the expenditure of those funds. So it's almost more, and I want to see if this would be your perception, it's almost more of an authorization if we were to do that within the current budget, because you got a breakdown of your 5-year plan of what you want to do. That looks to me like it's covered under the $100 million bond proposal to accommodate this, so that it doesn't look like we're shorting you in terms of your budget request in this particular capital outlay area. Can we agree on that?
I would say, I guess yes and no, right?
Okay.
Yes, the $100 million will help. The legislation, the way it's constructed, lends itself more to doing lease-back arrangements. So, for a elementary school that does need a couple of ramps built for ADA compliance and for this and that, but may not be in a situation where you want to lease that school out. I mean, I think we have to be very careful how we lease government property out over the long term. That may be a situation where you don't want that covered under the $100 million if all those resources are better spent through a lease-back arrangement. So I think that with the $100 million, we focus on those schools that have that level of significance in terms of their needs, so that we say, look, you guys come in here, this is where all the work is, this is where all the issues are. Something like a Simon Sanchez is very clear that we need to address that facility for the safety of the students long term. And that'll take up, so we may be able to do 4 or 5 schools that way at the most, because of the expense. These are expensive investments and over the long term. And that's fine. I think the value is going to be with the master facilities planning to be able to really go develop a strategic plan looking at all of our facilities. I believe that those who are going to bid will have an opportunity to offer, because it's part of the requirements to offer ideas for financial resources to address the remainder of the schools that could go above and beyond the $100 million. But what we need right now is we've got the funding available to address some of our neediest and largest schools. We have the funding to finally move forward with the master facilities plan, which will help us and give us a sense of how to move forward. then I think at the end of the day, what I will still want to ask for is some dedication of funds. It may not be at the full, 90 or $20 million level because we have this $100 million pot out there, but to have some level of support to address some of the critical needs. So if I go to Agata Johnson, everything looks good except for, structurally good. The windows need to be replaced or the canopies need to be addressed. Those are clear issues that affect students. Love to have the ability to say, do we have resources to just fix the canopies? And those are, expensive projects. And there are schools that are structurally fine. You don't need, that have the capacity to serve the number of students that you don't need to expand it. It's just maybe adding a ramp, redoing, just adding smaller pieces that don't lend themselves to the lease back arrangement. So that's really what I'm asking, is that there's some also flexible. When we saw $100 million, we said maybe there was a possibility to do lease back, and a portion of it also more flexible use locally that we can disperse to do all the health and safety needs at all of our schools. That would have been ideal. I don't know that that's possible from what I understand, given the guidance from GITA.
Yeah, with this request, I'm definitely going to speak to the chairman and the speaker, the education, because it seems like we're going to need a reconciliation here. I think because if we were to take this on face value, what we're looking at basically here now, if we took these independently, we would be saying then that basically the request is $200 million.
Well, let me clarify that. This
Sure.
was, again, like I said, I'm going to want to recognize that this was done in January.
Okay.
That we have a list of schools that have a lot of needs based on the Army Corps report and based on
Sure.
how we would recommend. And so I think, yes, the $100 million will go a long way. What I'm saying is this is the request that was made.
Okay.
I think it would be good to be in a discussion over what that right level of amount is
Right.
this year. That would help us, because I can produce the list of issues
Yeah.
at the schools that don't need a lease back arrangement. They just need some resources to finally address these broken gutters that are out there, rusting away and presenting hazards.
And that'll lead to my wrap up.
Right.
That's what I kind of just one more small question after that. What the thing is that, and I know that we're all going to come to the table and there will be a month of going over this before we present our budget as passed by this legislature to the governor. But I like the aggressive nature in the way you've identified this. But given the fact that with the $100 million procurement out there to handle some of the larger heavy projects and then this identification, I think there has to be a reconciliation of exactly what your punch list is. And I know that everything there is serious, and I don't question the veracity of the document. I just say that you're right. I mean, if we're gonna eat this big chunk one bite at a time, I would just appreciate a breakdown of what we could deliberate on this floor, saying what's the figure, what's the sweet spot figure right now that we can say we're gonna make a big dent in this fiscal year on the smaller.
Yeah. I just want to say I think we're on the same page. I think that because after this was when we saw the legislation come through and then the procurement move forward.
Right.
In addition, we've started to see the proceeds coming in from the limited gaming bill, which, as we said, we do need resources for our sports facilities. And if that resource becomes available to address some of these needs, of course, we're not talking about trying to just ramp up the number of dollars. We're trying to figure out how to address these key projects.
Yeah.
And if we can start knocking them off, then that's real progress.
That will be my final comment. I know that I've watched the tracking. I've reconciled the recent number. You're on track for September distribution of an additional $350,000 on top of the 230 you've gotten. Will that 230 be able to address the shortfalls of any GW issues, the additional lighting, and then other projects, perhaps? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think we're done. I think we're able to already address GW, and that was just a little bit more that may have been needed, but we'll have the track and the lighting available and done. But as you know, I mean, as the funds start to come in, it's really a matter of sorting out. We have a number of priorities. Some would fall within this amount, some are bigger projects, and many needs. So we'd like to identify those priorities and to be able to allocate these funds. But very grateful for that amount of funds.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I'll preface our conversation by saying, of course, I'm a huge supporter of DOE, various family ties, a public school student. For me, it's all about the numbers, and so that's pretty much what we're here to talk about. And I've kind of been pouring through all the data that we've been afforded, and being a new senator, I always kind of wonder, do we go through these budget cycles where the agency is kind of going after as much as they can, knowing that they're going to get eventually cut down to a livable amount? When I look at the spreadsheet that you guys provided, I mean, it definitely shows that, you know, in the past 4 to 5 years, where the requests have been upwards of 260 million plus, but the actual appropriations have been at the highest 222 million. So 266 million in FY11, 261 in 12, 294 in 13, 283 in 14. But the actual amounts you guys were given were tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars below that. So I look at the 298 number and I'm like, okay, are we operating in an environment where we're trying to ask for 298 because we know we're going to get 230, you know? And so I'm kind of digging back into the numbers here, and there's just a couple things that are jumping out at me that I wanted to go over. The first is the percentage increases year over year. Some of them are pretty, you know, they kind of jump out at me. For example, just on personnel services, for example, overtime goes from 70,000 authorized in 2014 to 180,000 in 2015, and that's over a 150% jump. On-call subs, 170% jump. Part-time employees, a 400+% jump. Going into operations, we have supplies and materials, 100% plus jump. Equipment, 300% plus jump. Miscellaneous, well, this is with the governor's number, but even looking at your number, it's over a, this one says 10,000% jump, but it's probably like 5,000% jump now. Capital outlay, a 6,000% jump. So, you know, we're talking about huge year-over-year increases. And so I kind of wanted to go over the year-over-year comparisons here and ask some questions about that, because I want to make sure that we're kind of separating out those appropriations that are being requested for this fiscal year that may be one-time expenditures versus those that will be recurring appropriations. Because if we're looking at a one-time cost, then yeah, maybe we can look at funding it because we know it's going to go away next year. And so the one I wanted to talk about first was the contractual, because that one jumped up pretty dramatically. We had contractual for the previous year at 26 million, and now we have contractual at 35 million. So we're looking at a $9 million jump in contractual services from FY2014 to FY2015. And I was kind of combing through the itemized contractual costs here. I'm having a difficult time really finding where $9 million all of a sudden just manifested itself. But I did have some questions of some specific items, but maybe I can ask the department to explain where the $9 million came from for the increase in contractual year over year.
Yeah, let me also jump back into a big picture discussion like you had. I mean, about coming in and what this budget process, how this budget process is set up. I'd like to be able to stand behind our budget requests, and so you know, I spent a lot of time dealing with that. You know, in the past, maybe in the last budget request that was made in the last year, you know, we use and you're very familiar with this, using the way the formulas are used based on enrollment to look at the needs of the schools. In the past, operating under the collective bargaining agreement was one of the issues about how the number of teachers needed, the number of support staff. All of that plays a role, because some of them are part of the negotiated agreement. If there are legislative mandates involved, we include that because we feel it's an obligation to make that request. And so whether or not they're funded, the request part is that kind of process. This year, we definitely reflected on that. It was Senator Ben last year who said, "Look, you're asking for all these teachers, yet you can't find the number of certified teachers to fill the vacancies you already have." And I said, "We readily agree," and that's part of how we've been constructing this budget. That's part of how we've been operating in the spirit of the union contract, and so on and so forth. That we generate these numbers, whether they are realistic, is of course a matter for us to discuss and a matter for elected officials to decide, as they render a final appropriations number. This year, you know, we took a different approach to make sure we are trying to be as realistic as possible. Yet, I think we also have to balance it with what we consider the true needs of our schools, and whether we should be negotiating at the request, you know, at the time of the request, be negotiating down what we know are true needs of the schools. So you'll find that before we get to the contractual, you'll find that right off the bat, we've you've got a significant amount. Was it $32 million set aside in this budget request purely for facilities, and that reflects significantly what when you talk about a report coming out saying you got $90 million in deferred maintenance. I think it would be irresponsible for us to not even ask for that money, and we got to figure out how are we going to fund these ongoing capital improvement needs in our school system. For it to come out of the operating budget is just really a challenge, and it's impossible. But what do we say then? Do we to ignore it would be a different type of exercise. So understanding the realities and the challenges and the opportunities now with the new legislation, we did want to put it in there to say, look, this is important to the school system.
Yeah, just to
So
clarify.
that's on that. So
Like,
I
for
mean,
example, like the deferred maintenance is classified
Right.
under capital outlay, the 18 million. That's not here in the contractual.
right? No.
So,
that's,
I want to know
Yeah.
where the 9 million increase in contractual actually is coming from.
No, I was kind of focused on big picture because I want to know that if it is addressed by other sources, we definitely can discuss about what the more realistic numbers. I'm happy to do that. But really, on the request side is just a starting point. And also because we do it in January, we may not reflect all the needs that happen in the rest of the fiscal year as we get to this point in time. On the contractual side, right off the bat, the facilities master plan is $1 million. So if it's incorporated and it's going to be handled by additional source of funding, that's obviously something that we can identify as being met by some other source of funds.
I remember in a previous hearing, the amount was 500,000 for the facilities master plan. Do we remember that? I remember us talking about that before. So I'm curious at it being $1 million now.
It's gone back and forth. I mean, the $1 million we set out was because that was what was authorized in the prior law that was passed, directing the Department of Education to implement the facilities plan, but was never appropriated. So, in a sense, we put it out there because that could be the cost to do the comprehensive facilities plan. Obviously, the legislature thought that was the right amount, so we included it for consideration in this budget. I'm happy to. So I just want to say that very generally, and it is not in any way to disagree. Just to say, in this budget process, we come in January. We're only a third through the fiscal year, trying to anticipate the needs for the coming fiscal year, and there's a lot of adjustments and things that happen in the course that may change these numbers. So I'm very happy to talk about the individual requests, and if we need to make those adjustments, obviously we'll want to do so in a way that's so we can get the right amount.
Sure.
With regard to the details, let me go ahead and ask Tolling to walk us through, and I'll jump in as well as we go through those numbers.
Right. So I think in your packets there is a schedule that lists all the contracts. Some of the things that jump out that are new are on line 30, security alarm services cameras. That's for the Secure Our School Act, and we don't currently have a contract for this in place. The 31, one of the things that our audit has found is that we have all these generators. We need to make sure that we're maintaining them. We don't currently have a generator maintenance contract in place. We have IFB that should be going out in a couple of weeks. SAT 10 materials, generally that's paid for with our consolidated grant funds. We're putting it in here as a show of maintenance of effort. As the soup was talking about, the $1 million for the facilities plan on line 59, and then we also talked about the increase in the school lunch, the food management budget. That's on 61 and 62. I believe the increase was about $2 million. And then for the others, we've built in anticipated increases based on inflation. We're assuming that contracts in the next year will be, vendors will be asking for higher prices.
Okay, so you put an inflation modifier into all the contracts. Okay.
So these contracts are contracts that we've pulled together from the various requests from the schools and divisions.
Okay. Yeah, some of the things that jumped out at me were like on line 41, the website FSAIS is a $74,000 website. And I was like,
We,
wow,
yeah, we currently operate that
that's a very expensive
in-house.
website.
So the hope was that we would go out and get this professionally managed.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us here have websites, and it ain't a 74 grand website. So I mean, and those are just some of the items here that I wanted to kind of point out because, like also for the Secure Our Schools thing, when I step back and I look at it, just crunch some numbers. If we hired a full-time employee to stay at the school overnight, it would be cheaper than buying cameras and alarm systems. So that 800,000, that's a one-time cost, right? Or is that an annual?
Ongoing.
That's an annual cost for a camera in a building.
Maintenance and
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
monitoring.
Okay. And then on line 20, this cash collection services. What is that?
We have armored car services that pick up the cash at our schools that are collected from the school lunch program.
From the school. Wow. So we pay $138,000 for people to pick up the school lunch money.
Receipts, right.
Wow. And then this E-rate on line 18.
That's our telephone and internet.
Wow. Okay. And then on line 52, this miscellaneous schools request for graduations, promotions, testing materials, subscriptions. So basically, all these, I mean, the graduations are great, by the way, they're really nice. But those were actually budgeted for in the, we paid for that out of the appropriation.
I'm sorry, which line?
Line 52. That's $500,000.
We try to
What's that?
pay for the graduations and stuff. This year we paid for
Yeah, no, I mean, again, you'll recognize as an ongoing request that schools will make. And in this regard, with regard to the past year, I basically took leftover DOI money and sent it out to the schools to help offset the cost of their graduation. Because it's, I wish we could do it at all the schools. Some of the schools can, some don't. We do it at UOG. We pay full rate, I think. We don't get a discount there to use the auditorium. To use the field house. And in this instance, it was good because of some of the shortfalls that some of the kids were going through trying to raise their own money for graduation ceremonies. So at least for that, at least to that respect, it's not the full amount, but we recognize that there are some things that the schools are raising funds for, and if we can find a way to support it, then this is what their request is for.
Okay. Some of the questions I had on the personnel side. This is a really big one. Actually, kind of jumped out at me, and I wanted to get clarification on the increase in personnel. We go from 125 and 14 to about 137 on the regular salaries. Increase is about 12 million, and that's of course because of the hay increase and all those kind of things. But what jumped out at me was a benefits increase, because if we're increasing salaries by 12 million, if we just put in the retirement fund contribution, that's another 30%. That's 3.6. But where's the other? Because the increase in benefits was 10 million. Now, if we're only increasing the retirement benefit, because technically we're not necessarily hiring that many more people, so it's not insurance, it's not life insurance and stuff like that. So if the increase is most likely only going to come from retirement, shouldn't it be 30% of 12 million or 3.6 million? But the benefits number goes from 47 to 57 million. How did our benefits amount go up almost as much as our actual salary amount?
So generally, I believe we budget the health insurance at the highest rate because we don't know exactly where the, which option the employee might take. So that's one of the reasons that would have gone up.
But we're talking about almost the same employees, right? So there may be a new baby or something they might change, but if they don't change, we basically overprojected the benefits side.
I think you're basically right. You're looking at what is actual in the year after everyone's elected their option.
Yeah.
And next year, I guess it's a matter of how to budget, how to make those projections. You can anticipate either going to keep the same option or they may the maximum risk side is that they're going to choose the highest option available so somewhere in the middle may be where we're at, but that's what we budgeted at, recognizing that at the high end, if we all, it's a budgeting approach, but if they did select the highest option, this is what the cost would be.
So this is assuming the worst case scenario benefits-wise.
Yes.
But because we're talking about pretty much legacy employees, or because and I'll get into the hiring in a second, but we're not doing too much new hiring, so there may have been some familial changes, but maybe that worst case scenario might not materialize so much. So we will have an over projection on the benefits side. Somewhat.
If in fact that's right, if in fact they do not take on the highest option, then we would be short of that projection.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about was on the actual personnel side again. I was going through the digest, the breakdowns from the difference between what's being committed to central versus what's being committed to the schools. And I just wanted to ask, because it's just so glaring to me on the numbers side, that the big bulk in the increases, when you break it down by these object categories, is actually at central office. For example, if you look down at the full-time equivalent, the full-time hires, we're looking at hiring 33 more people at central, but in elementary 0, in middle school 0, in high school 14 more, but in our elementary middle schools, no new hires and 33 new hires in central office.
That's correct.
Okay.
The 33 new hires, as I mentioned earlier, was related to, again, trying to find a way to reduce what we're spending on third-party overtime by building capacity within the central office. And so we're not going to be able to really address those high-risk areas without ensuring that we have adequate capacity at the central office. So, for instance, if you in that breakdown of 33 positions, you will see our focus on some of the business functions, the audit function in particular is a main priority. And so that's it's a recognized. I mean, I don't like to go out and just add central office employees knowing that the perception looks that way. But in this case, the trade-off is going to be, can we hire and better use our local funds to build more permanent capacity than bringing on higher paid consultants and through the fiduciary agent to do that same work that we want to be able to do for ourselves.
I think it's a great idea. And the only thing that kind of jumps out at me is, if we're going that route, why is our contractual also elevating so high? You know, I mean, if we're looking at building more in-house capacity, shouldn't our contractual kind of be falling off as an exchange? So that's just something I kind of wanted to bring up.
That's the concept, and that would have to take place, hopefully take place over time, that we would be able to make that dollar for dollar adjustment.
Okay.
I think you probably recognize that as you do this, because they are the fiduciary not required by USED, they have that responsibility. They have the final sign-offs. Because we're making a transition, we're going to need that opportunity to build that capacity while we're still under the third-party oversight. I would hope it to be a dollar for dollar reduction, but in some cases it may be that we're trying to build some redundant functions in the organization before we make the transition off of there. And that may be what happens because of under USED's requirement, that they may not allow us to transition that function until we've shown the redundant functioning unit that we can demonstrate. So so I hope if I take $1 off the contract and add $1, that works out that way. Okay. But that's just recognizing that the transition may result in some overlap of redundant functions.
Okay. I mean, for me, the honest truth is that if I'm gonna go on that, it's gonna be going on a lot of trust. You know, because the idea of increasing the costs on the internal side, because it's going to reduce the cost on the external side, that's hopefully going to happen. Historically, that's been problematic. We have new leadership, though, so if we're going to go that route, it's going to be we're trusting you.
Well, Senator, I agree with you, but it's just that when you look at the opposite side of it, it's that if you don't build the capacity, you either are going to pay that money to a third party or give up the access to $60 million in federal funds. So, and saying, trust me, I'm going to try to do what we can to remove that third party requirement. But third party, but still maintain our access to those federal funds. That means building ourselves up to be a strong financial management organization.
Okay. If we're going to be raising it on the internal side, I'd like to see the contractual actually drop. But yeah. I can understand where you're coming from, where there's going to be that middle road where it's going to kind of be elevated along the way, but then it's going to drop off afterwards. So we're going to keep track on that one for sure. But just to kind of put on the record here, Central, the personnel cost on Central is going up by $12 million. And that's as much as almost all three of the elementary, middle, and high school. Because here you're $7 million in elementary, 3 in middle, 3 in high. So that's $13 million at the school site, $12 million central. So, I mean, we always talk about money into the classroom, affecting teaching and learning, making sure we're getting the resources to the kids. If we're going to invest in Central, Central's going to have to produce a stellar return with that money coming in. So we're going to be putting a lot of faith and confidence in you if we're going to go that route.
Well, I think what I mentioned before is that one of the things that I think in terms of central office functions, and you're very familiar with the public school system, so you know this. There are the things that we need to do is make sure employees get paid on time, make sure we get supplies and materials out to the classroom, make sure we're accountable for all the resources that we have. And we know very well that, again, on the procurement side we mentioned, that's key to making sure that we get our supplies and materials out to the classroom. So we're definitely focused on trying to make change there. I think the audit function that we build is going to be helpful because we've got to have that internal check and balance as to how we're doing. And we say we're going to do that. This is our goal, but are we meeting those goals? And are we able to correct ourselves when we see that we're failing? That is going to be an important function over the coming year to really build that into a strong program.
Yeah, and so and then going back to contractual, I mean, we have the Munis. It's a really good financial management tool. But we're also hiring internal auditors. So if that system is supposed to be building our ability to be able to analyze our data, I would hope that we would already have the existing capacity to work with that system. But if the argument is that no, we actually do need to build a little bit more capacity internally to get the full return on that investment, then I guess we can go with that and hold firm to that. The other thing that I just wanted to bring up was that the operations budget for Central goes up $7 million, and that's almost as much as the operations budget for all the elementary, middle, and high. Elementary was 3, middle was 2.2, high was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, yeah. So Central's going up 7, all the schools are going up 9. And then the capital outlay, that was another one that kind of really jumped out at me. Central's capital outlay cost is $19 million. It's 0 capital outlay budgeted for the elementary schools, only $4 million for the middle schools, and only $1 million for the high schools. That one I think needs to be explained a little bit.
Yeah, so I think part of it is how we're allocating those budgeted numbers. So for instance, if we deployed $18 million to do facilities and maintenance work on with the schools, where we're housing it is probably what's being reflected in there, where it's being housed in facilities and maintenance, which is part of the central office. But really, it's to be deployed to the schools. So if there is, for instance, if we have $18 million in facilities and maintenance, and we go out for, eventually go out to contract the services out, or to do the work directly in the schools, the work is being reflected in the schools. So what you're seeing is not a true reflection of how that would be deployed in terms of eventual services.
So the expense item will be categorized under Central, but it'll actually be for benefit of district-wide.
So there's certain things like that, like certainly in facilities and maintenance, we're not going to be building a new Central anything.
Yeah, okay.
It's going to. So I mean, I don't know what we're going to do, but you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, I think when you say what happened to the $18 million, if that was the allocation, we would want to be able to demonstrate this is where the money went, and it would be school-centered.
And those are kind of some of the things I'd probably like us as a government to start doing a little bit differently as we budget, because it gets very, very hard for us to track the return on investment when we begin categorizing it this way, but we're not tracking exactly how it's being deployed to the stakeholders. And so, I can get behind that money for Central if we can make a very strong case that, 90% of it is actually for benefit of the schools,
I think that's the same situation with some of the contractual service where they are reflected in Central, but they're really for the benefit of the schools. So we manage like the pest control, but we're doing it in our school sites.
Okay, and then what will be really good too is if we can show a year-over-year comparison of how those numbers are going up, and then how when they get to the service area, what we can expect to be improved at the actual school site. So for example, if we're going to expense $19 million capital outlay in Central, how is that going to translate into what tangible improvements at the particular schools? My only other thing that I kind of wanted to touch on was on the capital outlay side, there's some expense items here for like dump trucks and forklifts and stuff like that. I can go for that if we're running a daily forklift operation, but do you think it might be more cost effective for us to give you guys a lease, lump sum, and you go out and if you need to lease a van, you lease a van. If you need a forklift, you get a forklift. But to buy the equipment, and then all of a sudden, because I got school busing, okay, and I got, when one bus breaks and one part's down, all of a sudden the bus is useless. And so if we buy the forklift and we lose some very mystical high-tech part, all of a sudden we're stuck. But maybe if we kind of lump together some kind of lease authorization budget for you guys to go up specifically for equipment utilization, and then you got to just kind of document what the equipment was used for, that might be a better. What do you guys think about that?
No, so it makes sense to lease when there's short-term, narrow types of projects that you're not going to need them for the rest of the year. So it probably takes some more analysis.
Okay.
I would say so on that front. So the question will be how much frequency and then over what period of time. So I know we do a lot of work. We need that bulldozer to refresh some of the ponding basins, et cetera, at some of our schools. We may not need it all year, but it just depends on the workload, and we can do that type of analysis if that's helpful. I think the second thing is, I'll be honest. I mean, we have like there's a what do you call it, agency support for each other. So when we don't have a dump truck, we go and borrow from from DPW, and we put wear and tear on them, and we help them repair them if we can. I mean, the agencies do that because there's not enough of these assets out there, and that's the reality. So I think that's why you see it, because we rely on our sister agencies to try to use their assets. But sometimes when we're ready for a big move, and then the port says, or the DPW says, oh, our truck is down, then we're kind of left out there. So that leasing might be helpful if it's a one-time thing, but that's a subject for analysis to demonstrate.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, there was one thing that just escaped me, and that is, I know we want to spend on the facilities master plan, and I'm totally down for that. But what kind of just gets me is we're going to be spending on the plan to look at everything, while at the same time we're asking for money to renovate track and field and a gymnasium. I'm totally down for that, but doing that outside of the scope of the entire facilities master plan, it makes me worry. Are we renovating a field that actually will probably need an entirely new school in 5 years? And so maybe what I might be more interested in is funding the master plan, waiting to see how that entire thing comes back, and then we can figure out exactly how we're going to earmark, that spending, because just for the gymnasiums and the tracks, that's already $5 million. But if the master plan comes back and says, hey, we actually need classrooms at this school because population changes or whatever, and it's going to cost $5 million, that probably would have been a better way to dump it.
So the master's facilities plan is included in the RFP that's out there, and we're hoping as soon as we can to expedite the completion of the facilities plan. I think we recognize that at any rate we're going to need some funding for some of these outstanding items. And again, it is cart and horse type of question. Yeah. I mean, at the same time, we need a plan. This is the same situation with our kids who are at these facilities. So I think we need to find that balance of really designing a long-term plan, but at the same time figuring out what are those critical issues that need to be addressed right now. So we were very lucky to be able to have the opportunity to repair the roof, for instance, over at the Rio's gym. I mean, you have a gym there that no matter what we plan for the school, it's leaking puddles into the on the court, and it's one of those things where we say, can we just address that? So there are some of those needs where you feel like you want to be able to address those immediately, and then some which you recognize you probably want to hold off because it might be part of a grander plan for that particular school site. So that's that kind of balancing act we try to do.
Okay.
But I think with the master, if we can get that facilities plan set and expedited to a point where we can understand what some of the major shifts will be, then it'll help us prioritize the other projects.
Right. I think that's absolutely. I'm 100% behind that. We got to see, because we're gonna have to replace schools no matter what. Over the next 30 years, something's gonna have to come down, something's gonna have to change, and if we can't get that kind of outlook, we go out and we borrow for all these other things without realizing that these things are coming down the pipeline and it's gonna be tens of millions of dollars. So absolutely, I think it's a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Actually, with that last question, the OFB staff insists that I ask this one question today. The department submitted a budget request for capital outlay of $24.1 million. Subsequent to your budget request, there was a request for proposal for a facilities master plan and financing of $100 million of school construction and repairs. What is the status of the RFP for this facilities plan? Does this affect the GDOE capital outlay request of $24.1 million? And should the RFP be awarded in FY2015?
So the status of the RFP is this. DPW is the agency that led the RFP and is in charge of, per the legislation, of facilitating the RFP to a final award. And both GITA and GDOE are partners with DPW in trying to support that effort. Right now, I think where they are in the process is responding to questions from potential bidders and providing more information. And the initial expectation was that they would hopefully in July get the responses back, and that's been extended. I'm not sure how long the extension. So the time frame or the deadline for response has been extended, and Tony's trying to sometime in August. It was originally set for early July. And so, could it affect the capital outlay? Yes, we're not sure exactly how until we get to that point. I think, like I said, $90 million in deferred maintenance doesn't mean $100 million in lease-leaseback arrangements. I mean, that's what we're trying to get our hands around. So we'd like to see what, I think number one is we'd like to see what happens when we get to the end of this procurement in terms of moving forward on Simon Sanchez High School. That was the number one priority that everyone agreed on. And I'd like to see how we can expedite the master facilities plan. That would get us a long way in trying to address these capital needs that were identified in Army Corps. But along with Army Corps' focus on some of these greater needs, there was an identification of, in their report was $5 million in immediate safety issues that ought to be addressed that aren't going to be addressed through lease-leaseback arrangements. Those are the things that we've identified. So these canopies that if further deterioration of canopies might be an issue, those will be something that we need to address outside of the lease-leaseback mechanisms. So again, three things in play. One is the RFP for $100 million, starting with Simon Sanchez, and we'll see how the other schools come out of the master facilities plan. Two is that master facilities plan needs to be expedited and completed. So as soon as we get that, we're going to push for that. And then third, recognizing that there are existing needs that ought to be addressed in the near term, separate and apart from this RFP. Now, whether that's $18 million or less, that's something that we can discuss. But I think we've given you a menu of different items that have come to our attention through our visits to the schools. So if we say, look, we have an agreement that we ought to address these gutters or canopies or the gyms, and we can cost that out and really give you a sense of how we'd like to proceed on that. And so, again, those three moving parts are something that these things are going on at the same time. I'm of the mind not to kind of wait for them to be so sequential. But I'm happy to say let's get Simon Sanchez started. Let's get that facilities plan addressed. And if we need to have some funding to address an immediate, near-term, urgent needs, then let's make sure we have the resources to do those as well. Especially if we think they may contribute to any future immediate endangerment or safety concerns with our students.
But I think the last question that they wanted was, the office wanted was, should this be included in the FY2015 budget? Or
what I would say is I would hope a portion of it would be with recognizing that it's separate and apart from the $100 million. And if you're asking for that amount, I'd be happy to come back with a prioritization.
I think that's what we're trying to get to, is that
okay. Yeah.
Planning for the 100 is probably unrealistic, especially since the RFP hasn't even been awarded and the work that
I understand that August 4th is the deadline for submission of the responses at this point, without further extension. So August 4th is when bidders are supposed to submit their proposals.
Okay.
And then we'll get a better picture.
I know the speaker had one question about meritorious bonus, and then I'll ask my last question.
Looking then on Schedule D, would this be the figure in which we would then reduce from your personnel budget, $1.3 million? Because I know in your summary that you provided, I think you came up with a total of $2.2 million in outstanding prior period salary increments and merit bonus. So the merit bonus is 1.3?
Right. So yes. I mean, but there was an issue related to prior and then current, right? Expected merit bonus to be issued over the coming year.
Right.
So what I said, if we paid down the prior period merit bonus in increments already, so that was captured in another section. And then my understanding, subject to any further clarification, is that the implementation of the Competitive Wage Act merit bonuses were suspended. I think if they, but also with the suspension, my only question, and I think that's why I say subject to clarification, is whether these merit bonuses are no longer being implemented, or whether they are frozen, subject to being paid back when unfrozen, like these increments were. So I'm not sure what the status is, and if they've been just not, we're not doing our bonuses anymore until further notice, that's one thing. But if we're incurring an obligation because the suspension is lifted sometime in the future, I need to be clear on whether we need funding in the budget to address that.
And one more, please. When I've written this law in the past on personal leave, the 3 days that the teachers get, and the reason for that is to pay this out at the end of the school year so that we can reduce the number of on-call substitutes. So those two are tight here, number 2 and number 8. The amount, though, that you've been requesting, and this is, I think, something we would need to see, is a breakdown by the different years since the passage of this law to see whether it really has made an impact in the reduction of teacher absenteeism, who now want to then cash in for the 3 days of personal leave. Then that should reduce, of course, the number of substitute teachers that you're going to be needing in the school year, because the amount apparently, I mean, for the substitute teachers, $2.1 million, and then you pay out $1.1 million for personal leave for 3 days. We need to do some analysis here because the numbers are not, they're not working out, because if that is the case, then there may not be a need. Although I'll tell you this, is that I've been informed by some, staffers in the schools that school principals hire these substitute teachers and put them to work in the office or other places in the schools, and not necessarily to cover classrooms. So it's important that you really tighten the usage of substitute teachers when they're supposed to be used in the classrooms, but not for the offices.
Thank you. And as long as I've already missed what I was supposed to do this morning, and I have a 2 o'clock, I might as well just ask the questions that I needed to get asked. With this merit bonus and the hay, how much is still payable, outstanding payable to the employees in both the merit and the
Everything's been paid.
All right, so there's no outstanding on that one. With your submission, do you have a listing of how much we would need for the equipment for the Okadu expansion and the Teton? Is that in there? I didn't have a chance to review it before.
So the listing of, so that's mostly for personnel that weren't able to be shifted from.
No, I'm talking about equipment and stuff. Collateral.
So collateral equipment at Okadu is already included with the construction and the development,
Okay.
and at Teton as well. So those are all separate. Our request is going to be mostly focused on personnel, and I don't know if we included instructional supplies. I don't think so. But it wouldn't be collateral equipment in our request for those schools.
In your earlier testimony, you mentioned that including the shortage of TEF, that actually the reserve is up at 11%. And Senator Ben had introduced and got passed Bill 235, which was passed by the legislature, but unfortunately vetoed. And it was proposing that the cap on GDOE be 3%. What was the position of the departments that related to that bill?
I think the position, I have to recall my testimony, I think we submitted it in writing. But essentially, there is an ongoing debate about the appropriate way to set aside reserve funds that is occurring between the governor and the legislature. As an operating agency, what's important to me is to understand at the end of the day that what level of funding we're able to operate with. So I think Senator Ben was, in his legislation, was hoping to clarify and lower the reserve requirement on DOE. I think the governor, in his management of the agencies, has said that the reserve requirement allows them an opportunity to gauge and monitor funding. but that they would work with us to ensure that the reserves are released in order to meet the spending needs of the department. So with that being said, I said, at the end of the day, I just need the full funding, whether it's set at 3% or 10%, I'm needing 100%, or that's how I'm operating until such time as you take it out of our budget. That we're working with that number. Whether we spend it all or not is depending on how we operate. But how we set it aside and reserve it, I've told both the legislature and the governor that we anticipate that we are working against that appropriated amount that's been passed by the legislature and signed into law. And until somebody removes it from the budget, it's hard to operate any differently. So I didn't take a position that 3% or 10% is better. I said we need the full amount, and we'll be coming to ask for it when it's time.
Okay. Well, that's an even better answer. It's that we don't want a 3%, we want a zero reserve. Okay. Again, the committee, the office may ask me to submit to you some additional questions in writing that I may have neglected to ask today. But I want to thank you for your patience with us today, and we will, let me make sure I do this correctly. This committee will now stand in recess. The budget hearing will reconvene this afternoon at 2 o'clock to hear the testimony at the Guam Memorial Hospital. The committee now stands in recess, and we thank you for your testimony today. And please get those specific written requests that I had asked for.